Chapter 1. Helvisti. Nora took in a deep breath as the ship sailed out of the harbor and tugged at her long fur overcoat that blocked the cold wind as she turned for one last look back at the city. She would miss Takroon and its cozy, bone-white wattle and daub buildings with their shaggy thatch roofs. She watched them fade away until all that could be seen was lush green hills dotted with flocks of sheep and smiling shepherds that waved at the ship as it sailed on by. Both sheep and shepherds seemed to be so happy. Those lovely green whirling hills seemed so quiet and peaceful. Day by day she watched the landscape change, from pleasant, lush green hills to dark, gloomy, and jagged granite. These mountains were not green at all. Any speck of color was the beginning of a pale blue glacier peeking over the jagged ridges. Nora grimaced. Even the pine trees near the shoreline seemed more black than green. The crew trimmed their sails as the ship slipped into the busy sea lane that led to their final destination. Her determined sky-blue eyes gazed up at the Helvisti lighthouse on the snow-capped mountain that overlooked the city and large port below. The city stood out like a gem wedged between two seams of granite stone. Nora suspected the brightly colored buildings of randomly assorted, vibrant purples, blues, and bright greens were to make up for the perpetually oppressive, gloomy gray clouds and harsh, jagged, snow-capped mountains that sheltered the city from the Baru waste beyond. Nora dipped her chilled nose beneath her red scarf. She was glad Vila had gotten it for her. She had initially refused it, but during their brief stop in Takroon, he had bought it anyway, and halfway to Helvisti, he had regifted it to her, which she begrudgingly accepted. It wasn't purely out of pride. Naturally, while in her military uniform, she was expected to follow strict regulations. A bright red scarf, no matter if it was the finest, warmest, and softest Takroon wool in all of man, it did not match her green military dress uniform, and although she was breaking regulations, she was now too cold to care. After all, with rank came privileges. She was no longer a starry-eyed, fresh-faced field mage. She was a war mage, and as a war mage, she was soon to take charge of her own regiment of 2,000 soldiers, which left her only 10 other peers who could openly disapprove of her shortcomings to her face without being in danger of demotion, and merely 2 others in the whole province that had the authority to issue any binding commands. Not that they could or would. For example, Governor von Claris was an elected civilian leader and had no idea what the exhaustive dress regulations were to begin with. And General Samuth Gordon, well, he would have to talk to her dragon. Right then, a hollow knot formed inside her stomach. As she remembered the dragon's final moments, as she stared helplessly down at Goldeneye's broken body, and remembered all the promises she gave him. Promises that if he just stayed alive, she would make everything better. She had tried so hard to save him, only to be told she would have to put him down. Even now, her vocal cords were painfully raw and hoarse from the gut-wrenching scream of denial. But no matter how much she wanted to save him, no healer could mend him. The one who had tried had lost her life in the attempt. If Nora had the gift of healing, she would have died as well, even given up her own life if she thought it would save him. Some might have pitied Nora for losing her dragon, but no one would ever forgive her for killing Maya, not even herself. The gift of healing was rare, and healers had their own hierarchy and answered to their own exclusive rank structure. A healer could just about snub their nose to any mage or dragon rider, so long as they were in good standing with their own. While the position of a field healer would be hard to fill, there was only one Maya, and she would never be replaced. Punishment was deserved, and restitution impossible to pay. Truthfully, she wished she had been flogged for the incident, but instead of being forced to pay restitution and dragged through the street, she was promoted. Sort of. Nora had been sent to Helveste, the northernmost province in all of Marin, and tasked with the responsibility to take charge of the Dragon Wing and assist what was affectionately called the Lonely Division, or the Frozen Chosen. Of all the provinces, it was the largest, with the second fewest soldiers, second only to Barlington, which was the innermost province, protected on all sides, and was primarily comprised of farmland as far as the eye could see. Nothing bad ever happened in Barlington. For that matter, nothing happened in Barlington, and she missed that. If she had her way, she would have taken her lashings, shaven her head, and retired into obscurity, and found a mud hut to live in. That was not to be. Instead, she was sentenced to roam the frozen Baru desert for the next 6 years. Nora wanted to curl up in a ball, but she couldn't. She couldn't and wouldn't because her sword companion stood beside her like a big, dark, warm, powerful furnace that radiated with excitement. She could sense the big man's presence. He was close to her, so close she could touch him. She turned, and her eyes went wide at the sight of dark, bare skin. Her gaze followed the black tribal tattoos that wound their way up his massive arms and chest. He had a radiant grin on his tattooed face as he took in the fresh air. "It's snowing!" Nora exclaimed. A deep hum resonated within his chest as he savored the brisk, cool air. Vila agreed. Nora couldn't help but be flustered. The rich, vibrant timbre that resonated from Vila made her feel warm all over. This ruined all of her pre-made plans to be absolutely miserable. Well, It wasn't so much that she wanted to be unhappy. She just didn't feel it was right. Being happy, after all the suffering she had caused, did not bring her any closer to restitution. She did not expect any of the mages in the Mender's Hall to ever forgive her, but she hoped somehow she could do something that would at least allow her to look in the mirror again and not feel absolutely wretched for having the audacity to smile back. Meanwhile, Vila was strutting around, having the time of his life. He was expecting a hero's welcome when he got home. Tragically, his parade was casting sunlight and chirping songbirds onto her funeral, and she hated him for it. "Where's your shirt? You're out of uniform," she demanded, with as much self-righteous indignation as she could muster. But she was not ready to hear his response. "In my pack. It is too hot for it, and the sun. I must enjoy it while summer lasts," he insisted. "Summer?" she spluttered. "Yes, in Helveste, there are only 2 seasons, summer and winter," he explained. "It's cloudy and snowing." "Thank Helveste, we have no mosquitoes," Vila agreed. However, he was not looking toward the city. Instead, his dark gaze was north, toward the great snow-capped volcano that could be seen even from the province south of Helvesti on a clear day. "There, do you see Helvesti? Have you seen anything so beautiful?" he marveled out loud. Nora shrugged. "The lighthouse is impressive," she admitted glumly. "It wasn't anything like Founder's Keep or the Dragon's Hall's watchtower in Glendon." "No, that is Helvesti," Vila insisted. Nora blinked and turned. "Oh, I thought you were talking about the city," she remarked in surprise. "No, that is not Helvesti. That is Helvesti. Everything is named after her," Vila explained. Nora let out another vexed, withering sigh. Everything was named Helvesti. There was Helvesti, the province, Helvesti, the capital, the Helvesti Strait, the Helvesti Inn, the Helvesti Port, the Helvesti Clothing Shop, and yes, of course, it was named after the goddess Helvesti. Helvesti was a local god, not officially recognized in the pantheon. There were many locally observed gods and spirits in every province and town. The pantheon was a shrine or temple that held images that represented gods within it, or at least the top universally recognized gods in all of Marn. "Oh yes, blessed be her name," Nora murmured. Well, Nora wasn't exactly a devout follower of Helvesti. She gave her respects. It was the proper thing to do. The last thing she wanted was to cause a ruckus or disturb a local god. While Nora was a devout believer and burned incense regularly to the pantheon, she got a little annoyed at the thought of some overly zealous believers in the business of deifying every local spirit, hill, den, shrub, doorstop, and trickle of water. If people made a mountain of a god, the next proclaimed oracle could just as easily build a shrine for every damned grassy knoll or ant mound. Well, Nora firmly believed one shouldn't blatantly disrespect the local spirits. If she had favor with Sprigga, the goddess of the earth and new beginnings, the local spirits connected to the earth wouldn't harm her. That is, if Maltine, the god of trial, testing, and all-around misfortune, had anything to do with it. Maltine was a controversial god. No one would dare remove him from the pantheon for fear of the perceived retribution to follow. Devout Maltine worshippers went about playing pranks on their fellows to keep Maltine entertained and distracted, so that he did not get up to any real mischief. Hence the saying, if anyone was acting a fool, or when things were unforeseeably out of place and going horribly wrong, you should always shout, "Side of Maltine!" Because if Maltine was not credited, he would be insulted and feel obligated to do something far worse. The crackling sound of parcel paper being torn open brought Nora back, and then she glanced over toward Vila and frowned when she caught the sweet smell of tiny yet expensive bundle of beeswax candles. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Vila merely smirked as he pulled out a fine paper hoop. He didn't need to, and wasn't going to explain himself. She already knew what he was doing. But it wasn't so much as to what he was doing that bothered her, but the promise that he had broken. Nora's face darkened, angrier now that Vila didn't so much as recognize what he was doing or bother apologizing. As much as it hurt, she wasn't going to let it go. "You swore," Nora insisted. "Yes, I promised I would not buy any more this month. But I did not say I would stop lighting them," he agreed. Nora's fiery blue eyes shot down toward the large burlap sack at his feet, and turned toward the smiling cleric, who had a faraway look as he gazed wistfully out north toward the great mountain Helveste. As he smiled and patted the heavy money pouch full of silver beneath his robes. "Son of Maltine, how much did you spend on candles and rice paper?" Nora demanded. But her anger and scathing words of disapproval were like water to a duck. "I swore an oath. If Helveste spared your life, I would give thanks and offerings every day," Vila insisted stoically, and smiled as he lit the candle and watched the sweet-smelling lantern be carried off into the cloudy gray sky. "It's a bloody fire hazard," Nora growled irritably. Not so. The wind is going north, and the ship is sailing northwest," he announced confidently. Nora responded with a pointed sarcasm. "Well, it's a good thing the wind never changes direction." Vila's smile faded, then let out a small grunt. That, of course, would be the closest thing she would ever get to him admitting that she was right. By Sprigga, Vila was a stubborn bull. Even if she used her abilities to shake him up and down in the air, he would never give in. She wouldn't ever do that, but she wanted to. "I give my word. I will not light any more until we are off the ship," Vila declared stoically. Right at that moment, the large three-masted cargo ship slowly turned into port. Nora shot him an angry glare. I should order you to stay on board and guard the ship, she threatened grouchily. You could, but I would not follow it, he shrugged. I swore an oath to follow and protect you, so therefore you cannot order me to stay behind, he insisted. I thought guardians also swore oaths to obey their magi, she teased. But Vila was not fazed. The spirit of the oath is greater than the words spoken. I swore first to protect, and then to serve. Therefore, technically, I don't have to obey anything you say. If I feel it puts you in danger, he shrugged. You should have been a lawyer, Nora sighed. As much as she wanted to be happy, she couldn't help but feel resentful. After all, her punishment was Vila's reward. She had lost her dragon and killed a renowned field healer, but Vila, her sword companion, had dragged her out of a lake, revived her, and carried her kicking and screaming for miles over mountain and valley back to Founder's Keep. Yes, Vila had saved her and was entitled to a handsome reward. Being from Helvisti was a win-win for everyone. Vila, the brave sword companion, would be rewarded, and Nora Frey, the loathsome, derelict Fink, would be sent away. Far, far, far away. Out of sight and out of mind. When the ship was secured, the cleric raised his voice, and all eyes turned toward the north. Blessed be Helvisti for granting us a safe voyage. Amen, blessed be your name, chorused the crew. Once the prayer was over, Vila glanced down, but his burlap sack that had been at his feet was gone. Vila turned. Nora smiled back at him as she hefted up the large bundle in her arms. Blessed be her name, she chimed right before she dropped the sack into the ocean. But the reaction she had hoped to get did not come. Vila did not protest. He did not try to get her to stop. May it always be so, he responded sagely. Nora immediately felt a stab of guilt wash over her. But she was surprised Vila was not upset. She didn't even sense it through the soul bond. Disappointed, but not angry or upset. She could never get Vila to be upset. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, she began. But Vila had already turned away. Nora followed after him into the cozy, candlelit cabin and silently stood in the doorway as Vila gathered up his things. Vila, I'm sorry, she tried to apologize again. I shall prevail, he assured her. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she ripped the scarf from her face. Is there any way I can make it up to you? She insisted. Vila smiled. I request permission to go to the Holy Mountain, he announced. Nora blinked and then frowned as she realized what mountain he was referring to. The thought of being alone ate at her stomach. Yet, surely he deserved some space, as she had been such a spiteful toad lately. And yet, she hated the thought of him going out into the cold northern waste by himself. Yes, it was his job to protect her, yet at the same time, she protected him as well. She was a war mage. Vila's job was to find trouble before it found them, and her job was to destroy it. Alone? She asked hesitantly. Part of her hoped she would be invited along. No, not exactly alone, Vila assured her. Nora lowered her gaze. Without me, she whispered. I need to complete the journey without magic of any kind, he insisted. Nora looked away. I understand, she said at last. It won't be long, he assured her. Nora didn't look back. Of course, she agreed robotically. Vila grunted. It is necessary. I would not be any help to you if I went soft. Besides, you will need time to get to know your new dragon, he encouraged her. Nora pressed her lips together. I don't want another dragon. I don't want to fly anymore, she cursed bitterly. But just as she felt as if she was going to burst into tears, Vila was at her side, and she closed her eyes as she leaned into his strong, tattooed arms and melted into his embrace. I feel your pain, Vila whispered. This was not mere words. Through their soul bond, Vila could indeed feel the empty, aching cavern of guilt and sadness inside her. Another dragon won't make it better. It won't be the same, she sniffed. It will be different, he agreed. Please don't go, she begged. The sooner I leave, the sooner I can come back, he assured her. Nora gave her a reluctant nod and smiled up at him. She knew it had to be done. Vila, her sword companion, was a wildling at heart. She had the authority to compel him to do whatever she wished, yet she would hate herself for doing so. Horses needed to run, dragons needed to fly, mages needed to wield magic, and men of war, men like Vila, needed to climb mountains, to hunt and to fight. As much as she longed to remain in his arms, she was going to love it even more when he returned, seething with vigor, the smell of smoke, musk, and pine in his hair. It wasn't easy being a sword companion, especially since the sword companions were typically the most skilled of the fighting class, who were tasked to protect their mage counterparts. Well, after all, a mage could start a cooking fire and send a whole army of infantry running in a mere seconds, without any help at all. Yet the mage's sword companion role was a vital one. While one mage could destroy an army, one crossbowman hidden in the trees could kill a mage. Thus, the sword companion's job was to protect against, find, and or avoid such enemies. To do this well, they had to be extremely vigilant, skilled in both battle, tactics, and tracking. These skills not only needed to be kept sharp, but appreciated by sword companion and mage as well. It was easy for a mage to mock their companion's efforts and struggles to do simple, mundane tasks, such as make a shelter, light a fire, catch a fish, or to fight with fists or weapons. Accomplished field mages could do all these things and much more. That's, of course, when they were not injured, exhausted, or startled, or wished to remain anonymous. Any frivolous spellcasting while on campaign would likely paint them as targets by both assassin and other enemy mages alike. Please be safe, she said at last. She knew this was a silly thing to request, Going out into the cold, Helvesti wilderness was the exact opposite of safe. That was the whole bloody point of going. To struggle, to be chilled to the bone, to make shelter, to build fire, to hunt, to go close as death as possible, and then to laugh and come back. Vila chuckled softly. "Safe," said the mage, who plays with fire magic and tames dragons. Nora grinned. Dragons. They were extremely dangerous. She wasn't really sure what to compare them to. Men. Yes, she thought. You didn't really want to tame them. A tamed dragon was a miserable thing. Vila's large hands moved to pull away her fur coat. Oh, as much as she wanted him to rip off all her clothes right then and there, she stopped him. Her hands gripped his, and she closed her eyes. She could feel his heart pounding in his ears. It was intoxicating. Her eyes fluttered. She felt shivers run over her body. "Come back to me quickly," she teased, and smiled to herself when she felt the flustered, rumbling growl resonate within Vila's chest. That smile faded the moment Vila pulled away from her, began gathering his things into his pack. Flustered, Nora turned, her face flushed red, her blue eyes alight with desire. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed. Vila apathetically gave his shoulders a dismissive shrug. "Packing for my pilgrimage," he grunted. If there was anything Nora hated more, it was being ignored. She wanted to light his pack on fire and cut holes in his clothes, but she wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of allowing him to see her lose her mind. Not again, anyway. Instead, she moved toward her own luggage, where she struggled to keep her focus on simple levitation spells as she floated odds and ends neatly into her polished wooden travel chest. A hefty, plump feathered pillow came whizzing through the air and knocked her upside the head, causing her to lose all concentration. Everything came running down onto the floor. Her makeup, her perfume, her clothes and journal. Nora turned, but Vila nonchalantly continued to cinch up the strings to his ruck. However, when he turned to leave, Nora ran and leapt on top of him. This time, Vila did not disappoint, as he effortlessly flipped her head over heels onto the bed and began showering her with passionate, fiery kisses. Not all sword companions and their mages were lovers. Not all were soul-bonded. But it wasn't entirely unheard of either. Chapter 2. I Dream of Dragons. The graduation ceremony was everything May wanted. The black silk robes with the golden trim, the solemn march with her fellow apprentices through the winding garden with its vibrant flowers and songbirds, to finally be permitted to enter Founder's Keep as a mage. It was all she had dreamed of, and so much more. It was too bad that they could not hold weddings within the great gathering hall. The light streamed through on all sides from the stained glass window and created a breathtaking bouquet of warm colors that sparkled on the polished white quartz floor. It was supposed to be a happy day. It had been happy. For years she had stared up at Founder's Keep from her cramped dormitories. But now, at long last, she was accepted into the 8-sided Star Fortress, as a true mage. Her instructors that had once scolded and corrected now embraced her like family. Soon she would be expected to choose her craft. The most popular choice was to be an elemental mage. They were typically field mages who went on missions for Founder's Keep or worked with the military on campaign. To be an elemental, you had to be quick and precise caster. Elementals didn't always have to be the most powerful. They just had to be faster than anyone else in a wartime situation or mage duel. Weather mages, in contrast, were expected to be powerful and have the longest reach, allowing them to control weather patterns in local regions. The other 6 were fairly self-explanatory: alchemy, nature, engineers, menders, telepaths, and dragon riders. May already knew what she wanted. She had wanted it ever since she was a girl, ever since she had seen those great, powerful, leathery wings fly overhead. She stopped and watched every time the dragon riders flew past. She wanted to be one. She wanted it more than anything. Every passing minute of every day, she had her nose in a dragon book, both academic and fantasy. She had only met one other person more in love with dragons than she was. She found Ben to be very strange. Ben was bigger than most mages. If he had not been wearing the apprenticeship robes, she would have assumed that it was one of the guards sneaking books out of their library. Ben's deformed ears were always a mystery to her. They weren't ugly, just abnormal. Well, not that abnormal, just not normal for a mage. Lots of guardians and their recruits had ears like that. Supposedly, it was a common injury from boxing or grappling. Being a mage required more will and mental prowess than physical strength. May wondered if she had the physical strength, if she would have naturally preferred it over magic. She didn't really understand the allure of having fun while being punched in the face by your friends. The thought was so alien to her. Even if she could pass the strength and conditioning trials and beat all those sweaty meatheads up with their own wooden practice swords, she still wouldn't enjoy it. Not like they did. They seemed to be having fun even when they lost. May could see herself finding brawling with their fists mildly entertaining, but only if she was winning. She hated losing. But Ben seemed to be just as at home in the library as he was in the sparring yard. In a strange way, this made May like him even more. It also gave her an excuse to practice her mending abilities on him. She wasn't very good at it, but she could mend a few bruises. This, of course, was not enough to be accepted into the Mender's Hall. Unfortunately, Ben was 2 years ahead of her. May wished he could see her now. She was envious of him. She wondered what it was like in Dragon Hall. She wondered if he had already become a dragon rider, or if he had been restationed someplace else. She hoped not. She had dreamed of what his dragon would look like. They would go flying away together and have quiet moments on the sparkly, snowy ridges, staring up at the northern aurora dancing across the stars in its beautiful ribbons of elemental flames. Well, dragon riders were technically part of Founder's Keep and had a spot at the Great Assembly. Dragon Hall proper was annexed quite the distance away from the actual school grounds itself, and was strictly off-limits to anyone except the overseer, who was in charge of the school of apprentices and all the mages in Founder's Keep. Founder's Keep housed 7 different magic disciplines, but the Hall of Dragons was truly unique, as anyone could join it. Sort of. The waiting list was long, but Mages and soldiers with military experience were put to the top of the list. There was just one problem. She hadn't told her family yet. After all the excitement was over, and everyone sat at the large family dinner table, the dreaded question was asked. The pleasant chime of a silver butter knife against a crystal wine glass cut through the laughter and side chatter and brought everyone's attention to Mauve, May's mother. "Your father and I are dying to know what craft you're going to choose to occupy yourself in." All fell silent. Even the kids at the children's table stopped what they were doing and turned to look at her. Stalling for time, May dabbed her lips with her napkin before putting it down in her lap. Her hand nervously clutched at the silver nautical star pendant as she cleared her head. Sensing his daughter's distress, Alfred, a large, heavy-set man, let out a hearty laugh. "My dear, take your time. No need to rush. No need to decide before we have some cheesecake. What? He chuckled. "Hear, hear," chimed her brother. May took in a deep breath. She would have to tell them eventually. It wouldn't be right disappearing for so long without telling anyone where she was going. The Hall of Dragons was not an easy endeavor. It would be like first-year novice all over again, but only worse and for longer. "I have decided," she declared. She paused and took another deep breath. The tension in the air was palatable. She braced herself for the deafening silence to follow. "The Hall of Dragons," she said at last. Mauve's smile fell. Her white-gloved hand clutched at her pearl necklace, staring at her daughter as if she had just sprouted a second head. It took a few moments for her to recover, but once she realized her daughter had been sincere, she jerkily rose from the table. "Excuse me," she whispered. Hoping to ease the tension, Alfred cleared his throat and reached toward the glass of wine. "Yes, the Dragon Hall is a very prestigious, very brave lot," he remarked, though it was quite apparent he was not entirely happy about the news. May understood why her mother was so upset. Her brothers had died serving as dragon riders. May was actually a little surprised at how well her mother had taken it. She had really thought she would just fly off the handle, and Mauve turned around. Her face was beet red, and her eyes were full of tears. "It would have been better if you joined the common infantry. Why not chase after the horse carts and shovel dung while you're at it?" she shrieked. "Darling, darling," Alfred tried to console her, but she would not be consoled. "How could you do this? How could you throw away all of your talents?" Mauve demanded. "I'm not throwing them away. I can still do magic. I'll still be a mage. There's a lot of dragon riders who are both," she shot back angrily. "You think it's that easy? You think it's just because you're a mage they'll just give you a dragon?" her mother scoffed. "No, they shave your head, you wear gray, and you work until you either quit, die, or prove yourself worthy," May thundered back. May, your hair! You can't cut your hair! I won't allow it!" May shot to her feet and defiantly ripped off her pointed blue graduation hat, revealing her cropped, fuzzy head. It hadn't been easy to cut off her rich, wavy, chocolate-brown hair, but somehow it felt more gratifying doing it herself than sitting down and being scalped by the barbers at the hall. Mauve swooned, and the servants rushed forward to catch her before her head bounced off the floor. "Oh dear," Alfred sighed as his wife was hauled out and glanced about the table. So, where's that cheesecake? Ah, there it is. Cheesecake, anyone? Anyone? He asked. May shakily reclaimed her seat and glanced about the table. She wanted to leave, but she refused. It was her party after all, and she was determined to have a good time, or at least not go crying off into her room. If she couldn't stand up to her mother, she wasn't ready to be a dragon rider. "I donated my hair to charity," May added pointedly. She refused to simply be guilted or bullied into an off-topic, non-offensive rabbit trail about the weather. The awkward, non-eye contact continued until finally her Uncle Marley chimed in. "For shame! Why give it away to strangers? You could have given it to me," he exclaimed in mock outrage as he pointed to his bald head. This got a few chuckles and lightened the mood, at least enough for her friends to stay a bit longer and resume polite conversation. She did her best to entertain them, but her mind and heart was already in Dragon Hall. Chapter 3. Come one, come all, to Dragon Hall. It was still dark when May was dropped off outside the city gate, but the sky was clear and the starlight was so bright the winding cobblestone road that led up to Founder's Keep shimmered like a silver ribbon. Even though she had already been initiated as an apprentice mage, Dragon Hall had their own rules. If May had chosen to go to any of the other 7 guilds, she would have been welcomed with open arms, showered with gifts and warm hugs, mentored and treated like family. This was not so in Dragon Hall. Recruits had to come with their heads shaven and dressed in worn-out gray clothes, and carry a written will and detailed instructions as to where to send their burnt-up, mangled bits and what was left of their meager wages. May felt awkward. She wondered what everyone would think of someone like her stepping off a nice carriage in the dirtiest gray rags she could find. She had been so embarrassed that she had insisted that she be dropped off further away. Howbeit, she regretted it as soon as she found that she would not have been the only one, and could have saved herself a good bit of walking. What was worse, she was now behind the growing line she had hoped to get ahead of. Dragon Hall only had so much space, and their quota would be filled quickly. While anyone could apply to Dragon Hall, not everyone got in on their first try. May knew of many who had applied 8 or more times before they were finally accepted, only to come running back to Founder's Keep a few months later. On the positive side, Dragon Hall was always looking for more cheap labor. On the negative side, only 1 of 1,000 would ever actually get to ride a dragon. But this didn't bother May. She knew over half of the people wanting to join would be satisfied just to have the opportunity to see a dragon up close, and the others would be weeded out by the strict, humiliating rules and back-breaking work. May felt confident she would make it, just so long as she didn't get injured, sick, or die. But May wasn't worried about that. She'd already made it through Founder's Keep, and magic wasn't safe either. It could kill or maim just as quickly as any dragon could, and she was already accustomed to chores, polishing floors, cleaning pots, and strict rules piled on top of long hours of study. While mages had the advantage in the application process, they could be turned away just like anyone else. Luckily, May had the advantage of reading all things dragons, including personal memoirs and accounts from current living dragon masters to the legends of old. Although she had never met them personally, May already knew about most of the dragon riders she'd be going in front of by name. May knew all this from two primary sources: Hidden in the Clouds, a biography and personal observation of cloud formations by Adar Solston. May had seen his likeness painted in the library. She would recognize his distinguished gray, peppered beard and thoughtful smile anywhere. His portrait, she found out later, was from Master Warren. Warren was such a colorful, funny man, she couldn't wait to meet him. His book, I Dream of Dragons, was so much more entertaining than Magi Solston's. Warren had lived life as a circus acrobat before running away to Dragonhall. Warren was also an artist, and his paintings and maps were the best in the world. Warren boasted of having a perfect memory and could draw anything to the finest detail if he just saw it once. May wasn't sure if he was embellishing or not. In the book he was always the hero and bragging how he saved everybody. Then again, if she was going to write a book, she was pretty sure she would leave out all the embarrassing things about herself as well. Even though Warren's adventure stories of how he become a dragon rider weren't academic or scientific read like Magi Solston's book, she found it wildly entertaining and included it among the small stack of books in her pack. Naturally, she took Magi Solston's book, and the third book she packed was Think Like a Dragon, Psychology 101 by Magi Glaudenmeyer Orsbin. May had strategically packed those books as she knew during the interview process she would be submitted to a search of her personal belongings, and she would be judged partially by her answers and by what she had packed. Nothing would be sacred at all, and if she made a word of protest, she would be dismissed and sent away without anything. Warren had been selected because of his drawings. While May wasn't the best artist, she had borrowed some of her sister's sketches and crammed a few art supplies as well. May promised herself that once she was accepted, she would begin practicing every day from that point onward. Besides, she wasn't actually going to lie. If she was asked, she would merely look down and shuffle her feet and let them decide if they were hers or not. So technically, it wasn't really a lie. Not really. And besides, after going through all this trouble of shaving her head and walking all this way, May couldn't stand even the thought of being sent back. She had to get in. May groaned as she shuffled behind what seemed an endless line of bald heads. She knew if she could just get to the interview, she would be accepted. She felt knots twist in her stomach as a horrible thought of having to walk all the way down the mountain and then wander around the house like a ghost with her bald shaven head while her mother constantly pricked and pried at her. May wondered if she could go and stay in the cramped apprentice dormitories at Founder's Keep or hide away under the stairs and try to sneak out into the dining hall to get some food, just so she wouldn't have to go back home. She still had her apprentice uniforms. Yes! It seemed like a wonderful idea until she realized that those were at home as well. "Watch out!" called a boy from behind her. May gasped and quickly stepped out of the way as several carriages rumbled on past. "Hey! Those people are cheating!" she exclaimed. The boy behind her shrugged. "Yep, somebody always does," he chuckled. May grimaced. Secretly, she wanted to kick herself for not trying to pull a few strings herself. Perhaps even arrived a day prior and sneak out from Founder's Keep. Loud, thunderous shouts arose and were shortly followed by the chorus of boos that rippled down the mountainside. May gasped. Later, she spotted the sobbing, shamed-faced youths walking barefoot down the mountain as they were pelted with rotten eggs and vegetables. May clasped her hands over her mouth when she spotted a girl that she had graduated with follow after him. No mercy or special treatment was given to the young girl. She walked barefoot and was topless, and her back was red from lashings just like everyone else. May turned to the young man behind her. "What happened?" "It's 8 lashings if you get caught cutting in line, and then you have to walk down barefoot and naked," he explained. May swallowed hard. Thankfully, her fears of not getting a chance to an interview began to look a little less bleak. As she watched the trickle of heavy heads and downcast-faced applicants glumly drag their feet as they began the long trek back down the mountain. Thankfully, no one booed or threw anything at them. It was hard for her not to feel sorry for them, as it was evident that they had tried many, many times. Some hid their faces in their shirts so no one would see them cry. As she neared the top, May could now see the large blue tent outside the gatehouse. It was precisely how Master Warren had described it in the book. Warren had even mentioned that she could see the gate that led to the sparring yards where the sword companions trained. While she couldn't see them, she could hear the smack and crack of wooden swords being hit together. As she approached the big tent, she bit her lower lip wordily. Out of hundreds that had applied, she saw less than 10 excited and very nervous recruits standing off to the side, staring up at Dragon Mount. "Next!" Another recruit ran out of the tent crying. May clutched her bag of belongings and held her breath as she walked inside. In front of her was a table of 4 very grim-faced dragon riders wearing matching black and dark blue checkered tunics. May immediately recognized Cora from Warren's book. She was thin and wiry, and her frazzled graying hair looked like a briar patch sprouting out from the top of her head. "Is there anything funny, child?" Cora demanded. May wilted, and her smile melted away, and she quickly shook her head. "What's your name?" asked a young woman with a long, dark ponytail and a soft but stern voice. "My name is May," she introduced herself. But the moment she did, her heart fell as Cora grinned like a shark and held up a letter. She felt her face burn red. She immediately recognized the handwriting. "Oh, Miss May Fields, I presume. Your mother sends her regards and hopes you will be well taken care of," she remarked sourly. "I'm pretty sure you're mistaking me for another May. I'm May Thatcher," she insisted. Oh, good. Now hand over the bag. We don't have all day," Cora snapped. May gulped and gave up her bag. Her eyes went big when she spotted Master Warren. Warren's face was full of gray bristles, and his long silver hair was swept back in a neat, short tail like a crafty old fox. She hadn't seen his likeness before, but she had heard so much about him, and she knew it was him because she spotted the small, flecks of different colored oil paints on his hands as he reached out and dumped all of her things onto the front of the table. "Oh, adorable! Look at this!" Cora remarked as she picked out her graduation star and held it up toward Irene. May beamed proudly. She was about to boast about all of her high marks when her hero, Master Warren, scowled in disgust. "Oh, great! Another wizard," he scoffed. Cora chucked the star into the fire pit. "I bet she thinks she's special," she sneered. May felt like she was going to burst into tears at any moment, but she knew if she did, the interview would be over. "These books look expensive," Irene remarked. "That's adorable. Tell me, did you come to read or to work?" Cora demanded. May swallowed hard. She knew if she said to work, Cora would toss him into the fire, and if she said to read, she'd be sent away. "To work, Magi Cora," she replied. Cora's bright white teeth curled into a cruel grin, but then she hesitated. "And how do you know my name, child?" she queried. May pointed to the stack of books that hovered perilously close to the burn pit. "Magi Solston spoke very highly of you in his books, Magi," she explained. Magi Solston dropped his notepad and quickly snatched the books from Cora's hands. "Cora, you're taking things way too far. Books are for reading, not burning. What's wrong with you?" he protested, and then frowned. "Well, maybe not this one. You can burn this one," he chuckled. Cora quirked a dark brow and smiled. "Gladly," she concurred. "No!" May exclaimed in protest. By the stern frowns and looks of disapproval, she knew she was going to join the line of sobbing, bald-headed wannabes on the long, lonely walk down the mountain. "That's my favorite one. Just give them back and I'll go," she sniffed. Irene glowered at Cora and quickly snatched up the books, but before she could stuff them back into the bag, Warren reached out and stopped her. "Hey, that's my book, and look, she's an artist just like me," he exclaimed. "Huh, it doesn't matter. She failed. Give her back her things and send her off." "The rules are clear," Cora snapped impatiently. Irene bristled. "I like her, and we need people who can draw good maps," she insisted. Cora rolled her eyes. "You like everybody," she scoffed and shouted through her cupped hands. "Next!" she called, but Warren quickly objected. Hang on. We didn't even get to vote, and right now it's a tie," he insisted. "Even if it is a tie, it doesn't matter. She failed. She doesn't have what it takes. She'll never be a dragon rider," Cora scowled. Magi Solston cleared his throat. His fingers rasped softly as they glided over his coarse peppered gray goatee. With great care, he used his quill to set fresh blue ink inside the blank cream cover. "Give her a chance," he insisted. May gasped as Solston handed over the autographed book toward her. "Look at her! She's already crying!" Cora scoffed. Magi Solston's dark, stern gaze fixed on Cora, and a firm line of disapproval set upon his forehead. "You would have cried, too, if your mother had tried to sabotage you, and your graduation star was chucked into the burn pit. Burning books is a line too far. If anything, she has proven she has done a lot of research, and she knows what she's getting herself into." Warren rolled his eyes. "Come on, Cora. Give the kid a break. Whether she quits or stays, we'll be back here again anyway, and it's getting late. Everybody's hungry. Let's just hurry and finish up the quota, he insisted. I'm a hard worker, May insisted. I wanted to be a dragon rider ever since I could walk. I know it won't be easy. I have read all about Dragonhall. I won't quit. I promise, she vowed. Cora gave May a hard glare. You'll quit. I'll make certain you will quit, she assured her. May stared at Irene, turned toward Warren, and then to Solston. Warren gave a somber nod of affirmation. Now get in line before I change my mind, Solston barked. May gasped. She had never felt so scared and excited in all of her life. She hurriedly ran and stuffed her clothes into her pack and went out to join the other recruits and waited to take the long journey up to Dragon Mount. Chapter 4 The Lady Irene. Irene glanced over the newest recruits. She couldn't help but remember what it was like her first time to Dragon Mount. She had been scared and nervous as well. Nobody spoke as they passed through the guarded stone archway. Once they were through the gate, Irene lagged behind. She watched Cora and Solston lead the way up the winding stairs to Dragon Mount. Warren turned and glanced down. Are you all right, little sister? He asked. Irene smiled. Yes, I'm just tired, she assured him. Warren gave a sympathetic nod. Me too. It's a lot quieter without Nora around, he sighed. Irene grimaced. Well, she wouldn't wish what happened to Nora on anybody, but she secretly was a bit glad that she was gone. Irene had always been at odds with Nora. That woman was a tyrant, and she made sure everyone knew that she was a proper mage and that she was in charge. If it was at all possible, she was worse than Cora. At least Cora could actually be nice sometimes, but only when you weren't expecting it. What really bothered Irene was the fear that was on everyone's mind. That very same feral bulldrake that had attacked Nora and mauled poor Golden Eyes was still out there. Male dragons were extremely territorial, and the chances of running into it again were very high. Irene couldn't stand the thought of losing Melody. The very thought of losing her dragon made her want to retch. While Irene hated Nora, she pitied her as well. Her only two friends were her dragon and her sword companion. Irene didn't know why Nora liked him so much. He hated flying and was so rude and bull-headed. Now come to think of it, perhaps they were the perfect couple after all. Warren spoke again. How's Melody doing? He asked conversationally. Irene blinked as she regained her focus. She is well, for now, considering everything and being cooped up and all, she assured him. We are lucky to have you as our dragon soother. Irene smiled over toward Warren. And I'm glad for your maps. I would be lost without them. Nonsense. The dragons always know how to get back home. It's the infantry and navy that get lost all the time, Warren chuckled and leaned over to whisper, Well, I take that back. Cora has always been a bit directionally impaired. Irene flashed Warren an impish grin. She knew he was alluding to the little prank when they had swapped out Cora and Nora's maps and compasses. Supposedly they wound up all the way in the Gojin Marsh, where Nora had found Vila, or rather, Vila had found them. The little trick might have been considered a success if they didn't have to listen to Nora complain about Vila for months straight and then pine away, wondering if he would ever come to her. He did, of course. Irene didn't know why. The man was a big lummox, and she wasn't jealous, because there wasn't anything to be jealous about. Irene quickly pushed Vila out of her mind, and quickly changed topics. "What do you think of our new recruits?" she asked. "Yes, well, they come and they go, I suppose. I don't get too attached to anybody or start mentoring anyone until a year or so," he advised. Irene nodded. It was good advice. Then again, if Cora wasn't so cruel, people might actually want to stick around. Irene shuddered. Some of the recruits had even taken their own lives. But this still wasn't enough to get her to tone things down. If anything, Cora had ramped things up a notch to make up for Nora's absence. While she had enjoyed the chat with Warren, she quickly came to regret that she had lingered so far behind everyone, as now she had no idea who to give the books back to. With their bald heads and gray clothes, it was difficult to tell them apart. This, of course, was intentional. It was rare for recruits to be remembered or called out by name. That was unless something bad happened, or if they were being singled out for punishment. Nora took in a calming breath and channeled her inner Nora rage monster. With a graceful and calm, determined poise, she strode into the dormitories. At once, the recruits who weren't working quickly got busy. While she didn't exactly know any of their names, she could tell by their body language and how personalized their cramped little rooms were that they had been around for a while. Irene couldn't help but feel a bit awkward about ordering young men and women about that at times were older than she was. It didn't help that she was short. Well, not that short. Everyone was short when standing next to Nora or Simmons. Simmons was so tall she actually felt a little bad for him. Magi Solston gave Irene a concerned look. "I was beginning to worry about you. Are you doing all right?" he asked. "I'm fine. I'm just doing some inspections," she announced, and gave the recruits a stern glare. "How long do you think you can pretend to clean that same blasted doorknob?" she demanded. The recruit gulped and quickly scurried off. Cora smiled and gave Irene a nod of approval. "You're getting the hang of it," she praised her. Irene forced herself to match the old hag's devious, tight-lipped grin. "It's rather satisfying, isn't it?" she remarked. If it was at all possible, Cora's grin got bigger, and her eyes sparkled all the more fiercely. "Would you like me to help?" she asked. Irene pursed her lips thoughtfully. "How about I start at the top and get some practice first, and you can start at the bottom, and then we'll meet in the middle," she suggested. "That sounds like an excellent idea. It will give the rest of the cockroaches less time to coordinate and hide contraband," Cora concurred. Irene forced herself to smile. She hated being cruel, but she knew why it had to be. Dragon Hall was not for civilians. Thankfully, dragons only needed to eat once a month, but it didn't stop their prey drive. This could be somewhat controlled through a soul bond, but not always. The soul bond merely allowed the dragon master to compel a dragon to return and to be aware what the dragon was thinking and feeling at the moment. However, that moment could quickly change in the blink of an eye. Staying focused, Irene proceeded on her way. The new recruits had just received their blankets and bedding. The only problem was, Irene just couldn't tell who was who. Books were expensive, and she couldn't get caught asking a line of recruits to describe their books to her. With calm, poised determination, she passed by each room. At the end of the hall, she found what she was looking for. The bald-headed recruit sat glumly by herself on the edge of her little cot. "I see you have a room all to yourself," Irene remarked. The recruit did not raise her head. She seemed a little disappointed. Irene quickly recognized Magi Solston's book on the nightstand, and as discreetly as she could, she walked over and slid her fingers along the writing desk at the center of the room. "You'll get used to it. Recruits come and go," Irene assured her. May shook her head. "It's not that. I forgot my books. And Magi Cora said if I left to get them, I wouldn't ever be allowed back into Dragon Hall again," she sniffed. Keeping the books hidden, Irene turned and glanced down at the bald-headed young woman in surprise. "How did you know Cora was a mage?" Irene asked. May glanced upwardly. "Well, she was in Master Warren's book, but I forgot it," she explained. Irene quirked a curious brow. "Am I in his book as well?" she asked curiously. "Yes, Master Irene," she replied meekly. "He spoke very highly of you and said you were very nice, but you like keeping to yourself and your dragon." Irene fought the urge to turn around and begin gleaning through the book for her name. "And, what did he say about Nora?" she pried curiously. The young girl's sapphire blue eyes went big with panic. "I haven't read it all," she said quickly. "Good answer," Irene responded coldly, as she glided her finger across the desk and let out a scathing tisk. "Oh, your room is filthy. If I find this again, you'll have 5 lashings. Do you understand?" she snapped at her. "Do you understand?" Irene repeated louder this time. But she was completely taken off guard as the bald-headed recruit leapt off the bed and embraced her with a big, warm hug. Irene floundered about. She wasn't sure what to do. This was not supposed to happen. She could feel the genuine gratitude and warmth radiating from the girl. Irene quickly shoved May's hands down and forced her to stand at a distance and reprimanded the starry-eyed recruit. "Don't ever do that again! If anybody asks, you found those books in your pack. This is not a fun camp or a dragon petting zoo, and I am not your friend," Irene insisted sternly. May beamed up at her and quickly nodded her head. Irene quickly dusted off her tunic and braced her hands on her hips and gave May another stern glare. "I meant what I said about the lashings," Irene warned. May bowed her head. "I know. Cora told me that too." She sighed and bit her lip. "Is she really that mean?" she asked worriedly. "Worse, especially now," Irene warned. But why?" she gasped in shock. Irene sighed. "The first thing you need to know about Cora is she doesn't like anybody, and she is especially cruel to the people that she does like," she warned. "That must be really hard for you," May whispered. Irene hesitated. Again, the recruit had taken her off guard. "What else is in that silly book?" she demanded. Nothing, May said quickly. Irene grimaced and glanced around. Do you have any other questions before I go? She asked. What did your parents think about you becoming a dragon rider? May asked hesitantly. I didn't ask, so I don't know, she shrugged. May bit her lower lip. May I ask another question, Master Irene? She ventured. Irene gave a nod. Could I see Melody? No! You just got here! Don't get any ideas of trying to sneak in there. If I took you in, you'd be torn limb from limb. And you wouldn't be the first Molly to do so, she snapped at her. May lowered her head. She wasn't sure who Molly was, but she was scared to ask. Instead, she fished out a tangerine-sized blue glass ball from her pocket and handed the dragon charm over to Irene. I heard she likes the color blue. Irene hesitated. Yes, she does. Fancy blue, she agreed, and her eyes narrowed into suspicious sideways slits. Do you have any more? Or do I have to call Cora in and shake you up and down? Irene asked coldly. May gulped and quickly handed over the hidden pouches under her baggy gray shirt. In each pouch was a dragon charm. These weren't magic, but dragons liked shiny objects, and they saw a glass ball just as valuable as any gem, and since they only needed to feed once a month, they often found treasure far more appealing than even food. Irene wasn't sure whether to be angry or impressed. You carried all of those up here? Where did you get this? She demanded. I made the belt and pouches and bought the charms, May mumbled. Irene grimaced. Your new name is Trouble. May bit her lower lip worriedly. I didn't know I wasn't allowed to bring them. Nobody said I couldn't, she began. You didn't ask either, Irene snapped, but then closed her eyes. She remembered what she had said only moments ago. May dropped her gaze. Please don't send me away, she begged. Irene grit her teeth as she wagged her finger, but she was at a loss for words. Finally, she gave up and placed a stern hand on May's shoulder and gazed deep into her big, frightened blue eyes and spoke in a low, stern voice. Stay away from the stables and don't get yourself killed or do anything stupid, and you might actually live to be a dragon rider one day, she advised, and pivoted back around and stormed out of the dormitories. But on her way through the dining hall, she spotted Torrin. Master Torrin was a big black mountain of silence. He sat at the table alone with a big mug of hard drink in his mangled hands. Torrin was not a mage or an artist. He was a battle-scarred veteran, and through pure grit and determination, he'd gotten into Dragonhall the hard way. Irene frowned as he glanced down at the sword on his belt and the large crossbow next to him. Well, it was not uncommon for Torrin to carry a sword everywhere he went. Well, he probably even slept with it. It was a bit overboard to go roaming around a mountain fortress with a loaded crossbow in the dining hall. Still, the more anybody had tried to convince him that it wasn't necessary, the more tightly he clung to it. Irene slowed down. The tension in the air was so thick she could cut it with a knife and scrape it on toast. He was scared. Everybody was scared, and everyone was handling it badly. Irene couldn't help but wonder what things would be like if old man Don Rascal was around. She wondered what he would do. Irene bit her lip and quietly sat down across from Torrin. She made up her mind that she wouldn't scold him like Magi Cora or try to reason with him like Magi Solston. Instead, she would be his friend. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Irene inquired. Torin slid his heavy wooden mug across the table. Irene felt her face go red with anger and embarrassment. He didn't even smile or make eye contact with her. He just held up his empty mug like she was some kind of tavern maid. "I was trying to be nice," Nora snapped at him and slammed the door behind her. Once she was in her private quarters, Irene tossed the dragon charms onto her large canopy green bed and glanced out the small stone circular window frame. Her face was flushed red with tears. She felt so trapped and alone. She couldn't talk to the recruits, and her peers looked down at her. Warren at least was pleasant, but he still saw her as a child. Irene wiped her tears and went over to light a stick of incense and closed her eyes. "Sprigga, guide me," she pleaded. Sprigga was the goddess of spring, wisdom, and new beginnings. However, as much as she tried to meditate on the holy scriptures, her mind kept drifting back toward Torin. She remembered yelling at him. That had not been right. She had only been nice for selfish reasons. She hadn't been nice at all. In fact, she hadn't been downright horrible. Taking a deep breath, Nora grit her teeth and turned back around. She was going to make things right, and she wasn't going to turn into a bitter, shriveled-up old prude like Cora. However, the dining hall was empty. Irene sighed. She already knew where Torin was. On the very top peak of Dragon Mount was the watchtower. In that little cold, cramped room was a small shrine dedicated to Master Don Rascal. While the shrine was dedicated to their beloved dead mentor, it was Torin who haunted that tower. This was Torin's place of solitude and contemplation. Irene had tried to come visit him several times before. He never spoke to her. His silence was so deafening and oppressive, Irene couldn't even bear to stay in the same room with him for more than a few minutes. Even if she was playing her harp, Torin's gloomy silence drowned her out. But that wouldn't happen today. As she approached the base of the ladder, Irene smiled, imagining the look on his face when she came up through the hatch with a plate full of cookies and a mug of hard drink. A big black boot pressed firmly down on the hatch. "Who goes there?" Torin growled. Irene gasped in frustration. "It's me!" "Password," Torin demanded. Irene rolled her eyes. "I brought hard drink and cookies," she announced. The boot slid off the wooden hatch, but when Irene poked her head out, she was not greeted with Torin's smiley face. Instead, she stared up at the bent arms of his loaded crossbow. Torin glanced behind her suspiciously. Without a hint of remorse or apology for scaring her, Torin turned and picked up his spyglass and found something interesting to look at. "You could have shot me," Irene protested. Torin lowered his spyglass and frowned, a deep frown, and gave her the look. That look was sufficient for all occasions and answered all of life's possible questions with "No, now go away." Irene wanted to throw something at him, but she reminded herself why she had come in the first place. "I'm sorry I yelled at you in the dining hall," she apologized, and held up the large mug of hard drink to him. Torin said nothing and turned back toward his spyglass. Irene sighed and quietly set the mug down on the wooden stool beside him and returned with a plate full of cookies with bright frosted smiles. "I brought you cookies as well," she declared as she pushed the tray into his arms. Haunted, dark, mahogany brown eyes glanced down at the happy faces. Torin offered them back. "I made them all for you." "Oh." Her voice trailed off as Torin took the plate and dumped all of the cookies out the window. Irene's mouth dropped open, and she stared up at the large, thankless beast before her. "Why did you do that?" she gasped. "I don't like cookies," Torin grunted, and handed her back the empty plate. Irene quietly turned away, hiding her face so that he would not see her quivering bottom lip. And when she realized that the thank you or apology would not come, she climbed back down the ladder and walked over to the nearby window to regain her composure. She flinched as the metal plate bounced off the windowsill. Irene swallowed hard as she watched the plate continue its flight down the steep granite cliff face, and then went on her way. Everyone had their secret place. Torin's was the lookout tower, but Irene had one even better. It had been years since she had been there last. Normally she could just take Melody and fly away and be by herself, but right now was different. She had found this secret place when she was a recruit. It had been the only place she could go to be alone, the only place nobody would find her, or scream, or be upset with her. When no one was looking, Irene slung her travel harp over her shoulder. When nobody was looking, Irene slung her travel harp over her shoulder and quietly deviated from the path. She flattened herself up against the rough, uncut, natural granite mountain wall, began inching her way around the narrow shelf. One misstep and she would plummet hundreds of feet to her death. However, Irene was a dragon rider. She was no stranger to heights, and she had looked death in the face every day. Once she was around the bend, she smiled as she came to a comfortable, spacious little nook. The smooth, moss-covered sitting rock called to her. She knew this place by heart. Every rock, every stone, like the back of her hand. It was exactly the way. Irene paused, and she frowned when she spotted the little wood shavings at her feet. Somebody else had been here. Irene didn't know why, but she felt angry and violated. She turned and quickly spotted the loose rocks and pulled them away. Inside the stone seam, she discovered a wooden box. She pulled it out. She hoped she would find contraband of some kind, so she could find an excuse to be rid of the trespassers. But what she found were drawings. Beautiful, breathtaking drawings of birds, and of Glendon City, and of the little flowers that grew in the cracks of rocks, and of course, dragons. So many dragons. Irene bit her lip as she closed the little wooden box shut. Whoever had come here came often, and she could tell by the sooty fingerprints whoever it was most likely worked in the fire pits nearby. That meant they would be back soon. It was what she would have done, after all, when she was a recruit. With a poised, secret smile, Irene put the rocks over the stone seam and quietly climbed up a little further until she found a nice little perch where she could observe from a distance without being seen. Time passed, but Irene was patient. From where she sat, she had the perfect view of the bright green ocean right in front of her. Over to the east, she could see the sun shining down on the bright orange shingled rooftops. The local deep red clay was so abundant and plentiful. At first glance, it seemed like everyone in Glendon had the same gentle sloping bright orange tile roof over a variety of soft creamy beige pastel brick structures. There were a few exceptions, of course. A few of the large mansions of wealthy merchants and government officials had chosen copper plating instead, which had now aged into a lime green patina in the sun. Irene turned away and fixed her gaze onto the horizon. Her long, braided, thick black hair rested over her shoulder. She had found this little secret place many years ago when she was a recruit, so she could sneak away to practice her music. Unlike many of the recruits, she had been chosen to become a dragon master rather quickly, making her the youngest of 6 dragon masters remaining in Dragon Hall. There had been 8, but after the 2 recent tragedies, their senior and most experienced dragon master being found dead, and Nora Frey being exiled, there were only 6 left. While Irene was the youngest of the Glendon dragon riders, she was perhaps the most famous. She had called in a young speckled, grey, feral fledgling at this very spot. Melody was its name. Melody was a very beautiful, very curious, and very bright dragon, and after a few treats, quickly became quite friendly and very protective. Unwilling to be trained or answer to anyone else, Irene was quickly promoted after serving less than a year as a recruit. Many years later, her story had become a bit of a legend, and Irene was affectionately known as the Dragon Whisperer or Dragon Soother. Most dragons liked music, but Melody loved music, and would fall asleep right in her lap. At least that was when she was small. Now, Melody was too big for that. Unfortunately, after the recent tragedies, Irene had not been able to take Melody out flying. She missed going out alone and playing her harp inside the secluded deep blue chambers hidden away in the mountain glaciers. As much as she wanted to be with Melody now, Irene did not want her dragon to catch on to the sense of dread and fear that gnawed at her insides. Instead, she focused on the ocean and took in a deep breath and exhaled, letting go of the nightmares. The nightmare of losing Melody. Losing Melody, like Nora had lost Golden Eyes to the giant bull drake that circled overhead, constantly looking for a way to get at their colony. Everyone was torn about how to handle the bull drake. Magi Cora, Simmons, and Master Torrin were eager to kill it, but Master Warren and Magi Solston were convinced there was another way. They just needed time to think of something, but time was running out. As much as Irene was frightened for her Melody, she could not bring herself to kill the great bull drake. She wanted a chance to at least try to call it in, to try and tame it. Killing the bull drake would be absolutely meaningless. Cora, who had been close friends with Nora Frey, was out for revenge, and every problem to Torrin was an ugly nail sticking out of a board that either needed to be smashed or ripped out. Simmons was afraid like everyone else. Irene was afraid too, but she couldn't see the benefit of killing such a beautiful creature. She hadn't come to Dragon Hall to kill dragons, neither had Simmons. Simmons just believed that killing this one would save the others from being harmed, but Irene felt differently. Killing this one would only mean they would be precisely where they were. But if she could call it in and tame it, they would actually be making progress. But the feral bulldrake was massive, and no one had ever called one in that big or old before. Well, at least, not tamed it after. But no recruit had ever called and tamed a young feral fledgling with a harp before either. At least, not in Glendon, and certainly not in living memory. There were stories, but that was all. There were stories of rainbows and pots of gold waiting on the other side as well. Those stories were not true. She and Melody had checked many times. Irene let out a long pent-up breath, but just as she felt the tension of her harp strings. But she winced when she heard the horrid twang, but it was not from her harp. It was from the rocky outcropping below. Without moving, her jade-green eyes peered downward. It was a recruit. A large youth with a sturdy frame and smiling boyish face. Irene was about to scold him for being lazy and sneaking off when she saw him pull out a simple hand-carved wooden lyre from the nook that she had not yet discovered. Irene's story of calling a feral fledgling out of the clear blue sky and being chosen within the year was 1 in a billion. There had been some recruits, by chance, who had found eggs or a hatchling in an abandoned nest while out mountain climbing, but there were many more stories of recruits falling and or being thrown off a ledge by angry mother dragons, and or hatchlings growing too large and eating them later. Regardless, recruits still tried. Irene could not fault anyone for trying. As much as she wanted to yell at the young recruit, she felt a smile crease her lips as he began to tune the strings of his instrument. Irene plucked a chord, and the soothing, rich note sang out, causing the young recruit to gasp in dismay as he turned to look up at her. "Master Irene, he began. "Your lyre is out of tune," Irene remarked coldly. He nodded. Irene extended her hand, and he reluctantly gave it up to her. "What's your name, recruit?" she inquired. "My name is Brumir," he confessed, clearly worried whether she was going to return his instrument, and dreading as to what sort of punishment he would receive for skipping out on his duties. If Nora had caught him, she would have smashed the lyre on the rocks, right in front of him, and told him to get back to work. That's if she was feeling charitable. Irene had seen her recruits flogged for taking a few biscuits from chow hall. Instead, Irene fished out the middle tuning fork from her tunic and struck it. The twin prongs hummed as they were placed upon the wooden sound box, until finally, with careful and precise adjustments, the layered strings melted together into an enchanted stream of rich, colorful tones. Brumir gulped as he accepted the layer back. It wasn't tuned the way he would have done it, but the chords melted together so wonderfully that he wouldn't have wanted them to be any other way ever again. "Do you often come here to shirk your duties?" Irene inquired. Brumir grimaced. "I wasn't shirking exactly. I was, just letting the fire settle down for a bit and getting some fresh air," he explained. "I see. Is that your wooden box?" in the rocks as well?" Irene inquired. Boomer's eyes went big, but he quickly shook his head. I don't know whose those belong to." Irene's stern frown deepened. "I think you do. Somebody has been drawing up here while they should have been working, and I want to know who it is right now," she insisted coldly. Boomer's boyish face hardened. "I will take my lashings, but I won't rat out my friends," he insisted stubbornly. Irene quirked a brow. She wasn't entirely sure what to do next. Everyone else would have been blubbering and telling her whatever she wanted to hear. At least, if she were Nora, they would. Maybe she was too soft. "Are you going to play or not?" she demanded, and glanced down at the wooden box and then at the harp in his hands. Simple, yet wonderful care and craftsmanship. Whoever had done so had carved them both, but had he drawn those pictures? She couldn't be sure. Boomer grinned as he gently felt the stringers hum beneath his fingers. I should probably be getting back to work," he remarked, and then paused. "Will you be here again?" he asked curiously. Irene did not respond, but the subtle, soft, secret smile on her lips told him all he needed to know before he darted off. The soft muted roar of the deep blue, white-capped waves resonated from down below the ancient caverns cut out high within the rocks. The caverns had been home to dragons for millions of years, but the cut stone had been carved out and embellished by the mages within the recent centuries. Yet even now, the caverns still resonated with the deep rumbling, throaty thrums, threshing of wings, and the clack of talons. The Hall of Dragons was truly a special place. Anyone could request to join. While it wasn't necessary to be a mage, the recruits still had to be good with dragons. Or rather, the dragons had to get along with the recruits. Being a gifted mage or a great, strong, strapping warrior helped. But there was not much strength, sword, or magic could do for anyone after a fall from 10,000 feet into some chasm hundreds of miles away from civilization. Dragons were as unique and peculiar as they were dangerous, yet having air superiority over the nation's enemies was worth both the risk and all the expenses that came with housing them. While anyone could apply to be part of Dragon Hall, the actual selection process, from a humble stable hand to being outfitted and designated with the title as Dragon Rider, was often long and grueling. Most recruits either got discouraged, quit, got killed, or went missing. Dragons were nothing like the friendly creatures of silly children's books. To become a dragon rider took years of back-breaking labor before getting a fledgling to train or inheriting one from a rider that had either retired, been killed, maimed, or simply went missing. Ben didn't mind spending time with the dragons. He was so fascinated by them. While they weren't cuddly or bastions of wisdom, they weren't monsters either. They were dragons. But after serving 2 years in Dragon Hall as a stable boy, janitor, and boot shiner, he missed home, and he missed his friends and family. One more day. Ben yawned as he rolled out of the top bunk and rubbed the short, stubbly shaven head as he stumbled towards the wash basin. When he looked up, his longtime bunkmate and friend was busily emptying out the small nightstand. "I'm leaving, Ben," Jason declared. "What do you mean? We'll be getting leave in 2 weeks," Ben exclaimed in shock. "I'm sick of it. I'm sick of everything," Jason growled. "I'm going to grow out my hair. I want to go back out into town. I'm tired of living like some damned minimalist monk," he growled. Ben grimaced. Everything Jason had said was true. Being a stable hand was worse than being a first-year mage in training at Founder's Keep. All their friends who had graduated were living the good life after they had chosen their respective guilds. But Jason wasn't that easily discouraged. Ben had never thought of him being so materialistic. He had stuck with him through thin and thick. "What do you mean? I know that. We all knew that coming in. What happened?" he asked. "I saw the list," Jason confessed. Hot, angry tears were running down his face. A concerned line formed over Ben's forehead. He and Jason had joined Dragonhall together. "It's been 2 years, and there are 100 in front of us," he declared. Ben swallowed hard. "But that's all right. Things happen. Maybe we'll be called in to capture a nuisance fledgling from a farm or in town. Maybe a clutch of eggs will be hatched this year or next," he encouraged him. "Or maybe a rider will retire and go missing or die," Jason grunted. Ben grimaced. He hadn't wanted to bring that up. It was true, though. That was the only other way of getting a dragon, but it wasn't something he ever wanted to wish on anyone. "Thomas has been waiting 10 years, and he isn't even on top 10, Jason added, and let out another agonized, heavy sigh. Folded his shirt into his suitcase and shut the lid. "Think of it this way, Ben. I figure I'm doing you a favor. With me gone, you'll rise up faster." Ben was silent as his friend pressed a small glass jar full of acorn-sized, polished gray merit stones. "Put these toward your leave time," he added. Ben felt a sharp pain well up in his chest. It was the pain of losing a friend and gratitude of his last act of generosity before going. It had been 2 years since Ben had seen his family, and he needed at least 20 stones to take leave. Of course, the merit stone could only be used after 2 years, which meant he would soon be able to apply. Unable to delay much longer, Ben went his way. The breakfast hall buzzed and bumbled with row upon row of fuzzy shaved heads. There were so many recruits, all eager, all striving, all hoping to one day possibly be able to ride a dragon, or even just be allowed to work with them. Dragons needed an extensive infrastructure and required a large number of resources to be kept happy. There needed to be kitchen workers, janitors, livestock keepers, security, stable masters, and of course, the dragons, and the dragon riders themselves. The hall was its own little micro-city unto itself. But right now, he felt alone in the large beehive. It was then a familiar voice called out his name. Ben turned. It was nearly impossible to find who had called out to him amongst the bland, morning faces and shaved heads. "Ben!" she called again. He turned and was stunned by her embrace. Ben froze and blinked rapidly. It took a moment for him to recognize her. Her deep sapphire blue eyes, her cute freckles, and strange offset toothy smile sparked a distant memory. It was either May or was it Tori? May? He ventured a guess. May had been a novice mage 2 years behind him before he had graduated. May's eyes lit up, and she quickly nodded. "You remember me! I'm so happy!" she exclaimed. Ben smiled. How did you recognize me? It's been so long. I don't think even my own mother would recognize me now," he laughed. May sighed. She did miss those dark, thick curls, but his shaven head did make his neck and shoulders more pronounced. "Well, you just sort of have the very unique shaped head," she giggled. "And nobody else has ears like you do," she added. Ben felt his face go red as she reached up and touched his ears that had been mangled from boxing. "Oh, lots of people have busted ears," he huffed. "Lots of mage guards, but not very many mages," she teased him. Ben grimaced and quickly pushed her hands away. "Where's Jason?" May inquired. Ben's shoulders drooped. He left this morning," he sighed. "Oh, he got chosen! That's wonderful! You are probably going to be picked next," May gasped excitedly. Ben shook his head. "No. He's going back to Founder's Keep to continue his studies as a mage," he clarified. May's smile faded. It slowly began to register. "But that's what you always wanted, to be a dragon rider," she gasped. Ben grimaced. "Yeah, I know. This isn't like the books, May. It's taken me 2 years of scraping to even be a stable master, just to be able to see the dragons up close on the regular and have the privilege to shine the dragon master's boots and shovel their dragon dung. It might be years, maybe even decades before I'm assigned to a dragon, and even longer before it's even old enough to carry passengers. I might not actually even get to fly. I might do all the training and then keel over from old age, and some other recruit will hop in and take my place," he grunted. But May wasn't discouraged in the slightest. "Oh, can you take me there? Take me to the stables to see them? To see them up close?" she pleaded. Ben felt his heart pound beneath May's soft, gentle fingers as they rested upon his collarbone. Ben opened his mouth to say no. "Okay," he heard himself say. His face burned as she planted a hot kiss onto his cheek. "Mwah! When?" Ben's dark, mahogany brown eyes darted back and forth like a cuckoo clock being wound up and recalibrated. While everyone is at lunch," he said quickly. May beamed happily. "I'll save some breakfast biscuits." Ben's eyes went wide with panic, and he quickly pulled her close. No, you can't feed them," he insisted in a firm, hushed whisper. "I meant for us. We'll be skipping lunch," May teased, as she tugged playfully at his worn-out gray shirt. "No food, not one crumb. Not anything. Don't wear anything flashy, no jewelry, no hats, no buttons." May scrunched her nose. "Buttons? Will they nibble them off like goats?" she remarked in surprise. She had been to a petting zoo once, when she was 6, and she had found that out the hard way. Ben sighed. "Let's put it this way. Dragons don't nibble. So you can look, but that's all. Then we leave, and we never tell anybody about it, all right?" he insisted. May nodded her head in agreement. "Have you attempted a telepathic link with them?" she asked curiously. Ben grit his teeth as May's voice bombarded into his head like a noisy one-man band beating a drum and blowing horns and bashing cymbals. Seeing his expression, May quickly apologized. "Sorry, I forgot how much you don't like telepathy. It gives me the shivers. Don't do that again," he grunted. May smiled apologetically. "I promise," she assured him. "I meant it, May," Ben insisted sternly. May frowned. "Why are you so uptight? I said I wouldn't." "It's not like I'm using forbidden magic," she insisted. Ben wasn't swayed. "It's bloody damn close, and it gives me the creeps," he grunted. "Ben!" she gasped, and shocked and offended that he would even imply such a heinous thing. "Telepathy isn't at all the same as necromancy," she insisted. "It's close enough," Ben insisted darkly. "Necromancers don't ask permission or care if anyone else is home. Telepathy is just the first step." May frowned. She didn't like to think of such things. The thought of studying the dark arts hadn't even crossed her mind. "For someone that hates it so much, you seem to know an awfully lot about it," she shot back defensively. "I didn't learn it studying necromancy. I learnt it studying the Drune, and they're quite proficient in it," he warned. May bit her lower lip. The Marn and the Drune had been at war for decades. Supposedly, Marn and Drune had been one country until the divide. Ben still had family over on the other side and often spoke about them. May didn't believe another group of people could be so horrible, but Ben made them sound like monsters. But she sensed the tangible anger and dread resonating in his voice, and if she was ever going to see the dragons up close, she knew this wasn't going to be a good time to debate with him. "I won't do it any more," she assured him, and gave him a reassuring touch on the shoulder before heading off to finish her assignments. Chapter 7. Who is Molly? May grinned when she spotted Ben standing by the archway. Instead of getting into the lunch line and grabbing a food tray, she bounded after him. "Are you sure you aren't hungry?" she asked worriedly. Ben smiled and shook his head, but his stomach growled loudly in protest. "What happens if we're caught?" May asked. Ben grunted as he led the way through the winding stone hallways. "Just a tongue lashing and you'll lose a few merit stones, but you won't be able to take a leave for a few years anyway," he shrugged. "Ben!" May gasped. Ben paused and glanced tiredly down at May. "You haven't seen your family in 2 years?" she gasped in shock. Ben grimaced. "I write letters. It doesn't matter. Jason gave me his, so I have a few to burn anyway," he chuckled. May saw him laugh, but she felt the tired sadness in it. "Are you sure?" she asked. Ben nodded and then brightened up. "We'll be fine. Just don't pull a Molly on me, all right?" he chuckled. May frowned. "Who's Molly?" she asked. "Don't you remember Molly from Founders?" "Oh, her," May scowled. "She was a snood. Nobody likes her," she huffed. Secretly, she was frightened Molly would steal Ben away while they were gone. "What did she do?" she asked curiously. Ben took in a deep breath before giving the short, tragic story of Molly. "Well, apparently, when no one was around, she climbed into the dragon pen, and one thing led to another. It took us 3 days to figure out she was missing." May suddenly felt guilty. She had hoped something bad would befall Molly. Maybe something like lice or poison ivy. But not that. Nothing like that at all. "Oh, Ben, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to be so crass. Were you too close?" she asked worriedly. Ben shook his head. "Molly came to the hall a year ahead of me, so we didn't spend much time together. I just remember everyone getting a long lecture about not throwing off the dragon's feeding schedule, and how overfeeding them would make them sluggish and increase the cost to sustain them. We all assumed she had snuck off to town or went back home. We didn't know what really happened to Molly until we found a shoe while freshening up the stables, he explained. So yeah, now you know the legend of Molly. May smiled and gave a nod. Irene had mentioned Molly to her, but she hadn't been brave enough to ask about it before. All right, so the dragons are kept in here. Just don't make any sudden movements or wave anything about, and stay close, he instructed. May sighed. Don't worry, Ben, you know me. I'm not a total idiot. I won't climb in or try to pet them, she promised. With a nod, Ben unbolted the door, and they were greeted by the sound of a low rumbling thrums and threshing of wings that resonated within the whitewashed walls. At the bottom of the stairs, their feet sank into the soft ashes. Is this all from the dragons? May asked. Ben shook his head. Oh no, we bring in fresh ashes every week. The dragons use it for dust baths, he explained. May already knew this. Feral dragons like to bathe in ash as well, but it made sense to supply the ashes before the dragon tried to make their own. How many fire breathers do you have? She asked. Only 3 are old enough right now, but we keep the ashes out so we don't have any sudden surprises before we are ready. A long head with shimmering jade scales curiously peeked over the stone barrier and greeted Ben with a soft, throaty thrum. This is Hatter's, Ben announced as he stroked her scaly head. May gasped as Ben invited her over to meet the young female dragon. Hatters, you're so lovely. I love your new scales. Have you shed recently? She cooed softly, and then smiled toward Ben. Her scales are so soft. She hasn't even gotten her horns yet, she marveled. Ben grinned. He knew there was a reason why he liked May. All regrets of missing lunch and worries about taking her to see the dragons quickly melted away. Seeing May's sense of wonder and awe as she interacted with Hatters re-energized him, and all thoughts of despair and leaving the hall now felt like a distant memory. With the May around, he was pretty sure he could be contented, stationed in the cold northern waste with only salted gruel every day. It was so good to see her again. Ben stepped back and smiled as Hatter's bright orange eyes rolled to the back of his head and thrummed happily. The happy thrumming quickly got the attention as several more dragons poked their heads out over the high walls and craned their long necks to see what the other dragon was getting that they weren't. Ben, why does it say Jade on her stall? May asked curiously. Ben grimaced. Well, that's her name, but no one calls her that anymore, he chuckled. Hatters isn't a very nice dragon name. Why do they call you such horrible names? May cooed softly. Hatters thrummed happily before raising its head and ducked behind the stalls. May gasped as it lifted up a mangled goat and violently thrashed it around. The sounds of bone and joints snapping echoed throughout the stables. She likes hats, that's why, Ben chuckled, but then put his hand on her shoulder and gave her a stern warning. But seriously, don't ever walk in here with a hat on, or you'll wind up like that goat. Or Molly, May remarked. Or Molly, he agreed. May took in a deep, shaky breath as she stepped away, but Ben put his hand up and stopped her as she carefully guided her away from the stall behind her. You don't want to get close to that stall. He's our bull drake. He can be a bit grouchy, he warned. They've been talking about moving him off to a different colony in another province. We have been having trouble keeping him apart from Rex, our senior bull drake. He's the big gray crabby face over there with the full crown and black speckles, he explained. May sighed. Poor Prince, you are so shy, she cooed. Ben grimaced. Not exactly, just keep away from the stall, all right? He instructed. May nodded, and they continued down the row of stables where Ben introduced her to Luna, a shy bronze hendrake, and Melody was a bright-eyed, bubbly gray hendrake. I always thought they would be bigger, she mused out loud. It was true. Ben remembered his first time. Dragons always seemed bigger in his mind. If only measuring from the shoulder, a Clydesdale horse stood taller, but with a dragon's long, swan-like neck, more than made up for its powerful short legs. They can get quite compact when they're settled down and their wings are folded. Just keep on your toes. All that can change real fast, he cautioned. But it's not their talons or their teeth that'll get you. It's their tail, he added. All the books say that, May giggled. Well, it's true. I lost 5 shovels to them, he chuckled. Their tails are dexterous, May remarked in surprise. Ben nodded. Yeah, they'll steal whatever is not tied down, he laughed. May sighed. That's not what I meant. I meant that their tails can grab things, like monkey tails, she corrected him. Ben grinned. Oh, yeah, that too, he chuckled. How do you keep them from getting out of their stables, May asked. Well, that's easy. I'll show you, Ben declared, as they went over to demonstrate on an empty stall. Oh, wow. It looks more like a bank vault than a door, May marveled. Ben nodded. Yeah, it's pretty sophisticated. We have to come up with something that doesn't involve keys, he chuckled. I'm surprised there's only 4 cylinders. I would have suspected the dragons would have been able to figure out something so simple, May remarked. Ben shook his head. Dragons are smart, but I haven't heard of any of them being that smart, he assured her, and then frowned. That's strange. What is? May asked. It's, unlocked already. Just as he closed the stall door and locked it again, another door opened. Ben felt his blood go cold. May gasped and quickly moved close to him. Ben turned and his throat went dry when he saw the very moody prince strut out into the open and flex his powerful black wings. The soft, calm thrums turned to excited, fluted chortles, followed by the loud rumbling roar from Rex on the other end of the stables. What do we do? May whispered. Ben gulped as he slowly guided her back toward the door. Don't panic and don't run, he whispered. Aren't you going to put him back? May exclaimed. Not by myself, I'm not. Ben scoffed. I can help. I'm a mage like you, remember, she insisted. Ben swallowed hard. All right. Just stay calm. No sudden movements. Fast movements will trigger his prey reflex, he warned. Yes, but what do I do? May hissed impatiently. Close the door when I say. I can do more than just that, May insisted. Help me with the small things, and I'll trust you with the bigger things, he insisted as he picked up a shovel. The square iron head began to glow bright yellow. May bit her lip and gave a grim nod as she calmly maneuvered toward the door while Ben attempted to break up the 2 bull drakes. The young bull drake spun around, its fierce blue eyes locked onto the glowing red shovel. Immediately, his grievances with Rex were forgotten as he swayed his head rhythmically with the gentle motion of the shovel. The sharp claws rasped across the floor as Prince let out an excited, chortling click of his tongue and slowly lumbered toward Ben. Ben tossed the shovel into Prince's stall. The young bulldrake glanced at the shovel and watched the hot metal fade back to black with mild interest, and then turned his large head and cocked it to the side. The floor shook and the walls rattled as the dragon cracked its tail through the air and lashed the floor, churning up a big sooty cloud of ash. "Hello, sweet prince," May cooed. Ben's eyes widened in panic, but it was too late. The young bulldrake's attention quickly turned toward May. "You're so smart! Look at you!" she cooed. Prince reared up on his haunches and flexed his massive black sails that spanned the whole length of the large room. "May!" he exclaimed in panic, but he could not reach her. All he could see was the shadowy outline of her murky silhouette through the thin, segmented, spidery web curtain of membrane that was cast by the lantern light. Ben ducked. He felt the sound wave and heard the bone-chilling whiz crack as Prince's tail cut through the air, crushing the metal lantern on the wall. The light vanished. May vanished. "May!" he called again. Above the rhythmic, slow, steady, rumbling growl, he heard her soft, gentle voice. She was still alive. "Your wings are so big and beautiful," May called out to the dragon in a soft, sing-song voice. "Don't go in there! You'll be trapped," Ben pleaded. But May was already slowly backing into the dragon's stall. "Does your poor head hurt?" May cooed softly. To Ben's surprise, Prince let out a mournful, howling thrum as he sat down on all fours. Large, hot tears ran down his face as he lowered its head. May gave him a soothing, shushing sound as she reached up, stroking around the bulldrake's thorny forehead. Ben watched helplessly as he held his breath as May quietly led him into the stall. Ben held his breath. He knew just one wrong move on his part would get them both torn to shreds. It was all up to May now. Or rather, it was all up to Prince. One wrong move, and they'd be just another statistic in a safety briefing. After what seemed like the longest 5 minutes in his life, May slowly got up and walked out of the dragon's stall. Ben let out a ragged breath. Prince was curled up on the floor in a deep, restful sleep. Once the door was shut, Ben turned to May. May smiled back at him. His head was hurting, and he didn't get to go flying today. And Rex did, she explained. Wait, how do you know that?" he gasped in wonder. "He told me," May giggled. Ben frowned. "They can't talk," he huffed. "Not like us. No, it's more like pictures and smells and things. It's really complicated. They think and see things completely different than we do," May explained. "A lot of it's gibberish. Well, it would be for us, but I think it would mean something to them," she mused out loud. "May, that is so dangerous. Don't ever do that again," he pleaded. "He engaged me first. It would have been rude not to respond," she insisted. Ben grunted. "Just don't do that so much. You're just lucky Master Simmons is a telepath as well. Not all dragons like that, you know," he insisted. "Like you," May giggled. "Yeah, but I won't eat you." May smiled over toward him. "You wear your feelings on your sleeves. I don't need to read your thoughts," she teased him. Ben glowered at her. "I suppose you'll know what I'm going to say next," he grunted. You were scared? I was too, and I'm glad you're all right, May assured him. Ben's hands unclenched and his shoulders relaxed. I suppose the tour is over, May sighed. Ben gave a sheepish shrug. Would you like to see the gear room? He suggested. May's eyes lit up, and she quickly nodded. Ben grinned and led her out of the stables into a side hall. Take off your shoes. It helps keep the ash and dust being dragged all over the place, he instructed. The gear room was immaculate. It was brightly lit with candles and full of colorful tapestries. Along the walls were private stations where each Dragon Master had their gear polished and set out on wooden armor stands. I thought they would be more colorful, May remarked, her voice slightly disappointed. Ben shook his head. No, they have been specifically lacquered with dull matte colors. The last thing they want is for their dragons to be intensely fixated on whatever they're wearing. May giggled. You mean like hatters? She laughed. It must be terribly cold up there. What does her master do when they are out flying? She asked. Ben grinned. Well, it's sort of tricky. Master Solson has the helmet and goggles sort of smuggled into the saddlebag while she isn't looking, and he puts them on during flight and stows them back away before dismounting, he explained. Most dragons grow out of it, but not her. I don't know why, Ben shrugged. It's because a boy used to throw rocks at her when she was a hatchling, May explained. Ben frowned and gave May a look of disapproval. Hatters was caught stealing chickens and ate the farm boy's dog. The poor kid was bawling his eyes out. Oh, that's horrible. I had no idea, she gasped. They aren't sweet, innocent doves, May. Please don't do that anymore. You might get hurt, he insisted. May offered a sheepish grin. I haven't done it since you told me not to, she giggled. Ben let out a frustrated grunt. Just be careful. Not everyone likes their heads being cracked open like eggs, he grumbled. I didn't crack her head open. She happily shared it with me when I asked, May giggled. Ben sighed. He supposed he couldn't argue with success. Still, all the Dragon Masters cautioned against it, even Master Simmons, and he was a telepath. Then again, the Dragon Masters did a lot of things that they said not to do. You know, May commented, I'm surprised that they don't use scales. I heard of other riders wearing dragon scales. Ben nodded. Some colonies they do, but Master Don Roscal didn't approve of it. Everyone here regarded him so highly they followed his example. He pointed out and grinned as he showed her the dark maroon studded leather harness. While the armor wasn't very colorful, May couldn't help but admire the black pyramid-shaped metal studs that flowed in a near-seamless pattern on the outside, or at least she tried to admire it, as Ben seemed to be very excited about it. That brigading set on the rack belongs to Magi Simmons. You can tell because he is so tall and spindly, he pointed out. Brigandini? May asked. Brigadine, Ben corrected her. Every diamond stud represents a small, interlocked metal plate riveted between the fabric, sort of like scales or roofing tiles underneath. It's a lot easier to get on than full-plate harness, and a lot more flexible, he explained. But why did they stop wearing scales? She asked. She had always romanticized about having her own set of dragon scale armor. She remembered all those fancy parties as a child, and the wealthy guests sporting their scaled purses, earrings, and suits and armor. That was before such things were made illegal to wear out in public, as there was no telling how they had been acquired. Some may have been shed naturally, others not so much. No one has ever spoken about Master Riscal. Will I get a chance to beat him? May asked. Ben shook his head. No, he died. There's a small shrine up top on the lookout tower, he replied. May was surprised to see Ben quickly brush away a tear. "Did you know him well?" she asked. Ben grunted and gave a shrug. "Everyone knew Old Man Rascal. I mean, everyone that's been around for a while. He was tough on everybody, but fair, I suppose," he sighed. Hoping to cheer Ben up, May quickly changed topics. "I do like this helmet," she marveled. "It's very unique. The wings remind me of something like a Valkyrie might wear." May glanced back. Ben suddenly seemed withdrawn. "What's wrong?" she asked. Ben shrugged and let out another heavy sigh. "That was Magi Frey's helmet," he replied. "Oh no, what happened? Did she die too?" she gasped. Ben shook his head. "Not exactly." "You remember the empty stall?" he asked. May nodded. "While flying, she was attacked by a feral bull drake, and her dragon was killed," he explained. May clapped her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and horror. "Oh no! You mean Norfrey? That's horrible! I heard about that in Founders. She was a proper mage just like us," she exclaimed in horror. "You know about her?" Ben remarked in surprise. May nodded. "Mender's Hall is livid. They wanted to see her to be executed after what she had done by ordering them to heal her dragon." Ben nodded. "Yeah, well, she was sent away up north. No one has ever seen her since." For a long moment, none of them said anything, until Ben pointed out toward the goggles. "They use different colored lenses depending on the weather and light," he pointed out. May marveled at the multicolored glass goggles. She was about to touch one, but Ben quickly intercepted her hand. "They are very, very expensive. I would be flogged if there were any sort of fingerprints or smudges on them," he warned. May quickly shoved her hands into her pockets. Ben smiled and shook his head. "No worries. Come on. No more sad stories. Let's get a move on. Maybe we can see if there's any food left over from lunch." May smiled and quickly nodded in agreement when the door swung open. A tall, spindly man with a goatee and long, black overcoat blocked their path. "What are you two doing in here?" he demanded. "A pleasure to finally meet you, Magi Simmons," she said hurriedly. Magi Simmons blinked. "Ben, what's going on? Who is this new recruit? Why have you brought her here?" he demanded. We were looking for you," he said quickly. Magi Simmons paused. "Me," he said. "Prince stole my shovel again, and I thought May might be able to ask him to give it back. May's a mage and a telepath like you. I thought Prince would listen, but he didn't, so we came looking for you," Ben explained. The sternness in Simmons' face faded away, and he straightened up. "Oh, he stole it again, did he? Well, is it still in one piece, or has he chewed it all to hell?" Ben gave a sheepish shrug. "I don't know. We aren't supposed to go inside." "Prince was very chatty. His head was hurting, and he is upset that he didn't get to go flying this morning," May added. Simmons grinned a big toothy grin, and his fingers rasped loudly across the thick black goatee like he was caressing the bristles of a wire brush. "They have been pretty moody lately. They haven't gotten enough exercise since that big feral bull drake has been coming around," he sighed. "And Prince is at that stage. I'm glad you weren't hurt getting him back into his stables," he added. Both May and Ben's faces turned to sheets of white as they braced themselves for the stern tongue-lashing to follow. Simmons glared down at Ben. He said nothing. Ben lowered his head in shame. "I'm sorry, he began. "Wanted to impress your mate," Simmons clarified. Ben's face was beet red. He wanted to say they were just friends or something, but anything he could think of responding would only dig himself into a deeper hole. "Yes," he admitted. To his surprise, Simmons punched him hard on the shoulder and laughed. "I'm not angry. I should be, but I'm not," he laughed. "Is that what Prince thinks we are?" Ben blinked and stared up at Simmons in surprise. You aren't mad?" Simmons shook his head. "Not at all. Turns out someone has been fiddling with the locks. Lucky it was only you two down there when he was let out. Anybody else would have been torn to pieces," he explained. "Who would do that?" Ben gasped. "Somebody who wanted to shorten the list is my guess," Simmons remarked grimly. "It has happened every night, so I know it was not your friend, and I doubt you would be stupid enough to bring her into the stables while all the doors were unlocked," he grunted. "I have my suspicions. I just can't prove them yet. Talking to dragons is sort of like talking to a raven. They have totally different priorities than we do," he grunted. "Prince talked about you a lot," May giggled. Simmons grunted. "Don't get too overconfident. Not all dragons like mages. Or magic," he warned. "Not all these dragons have been hatched in the lap of luxury. Some have been taken as fledglings, and they tend to have a few odd hang-ups," he warned. "Like hatters," May remarked. Master Simmons nodded. "So you know about hatters as well?" "Yes, I suppose. She doesn't like hats. Some dragons don't like mages for that same reason," he cautioned. "But why?" May asked. "If a mage killed your mother, you wouldn't like mages either," Simmons shrugged. "But who would do that?" May gasped. "Mages that don't share our values. Sometimes dead dragons are much easier to control," Simmons explained. "Necromancy, that's barbaric," she gasped. The very thought of it was wretched and twisted her stomach into knots. "It is what it is," Simmons sighed. "But who is leaving the doors unlocked?" Ben asked. "If May wasn't there, I would have been the one ripped to pieces." Simmons shook his head. "Let's put it this way. If you hadn't introduced May, she would have been the one torn limb from limb," he warned. "But Prince, he was on to me. He wasn't having any of it," Ben insisted. Simmons smiled. "Right now, Prince is a cantankerous toad. He was just trying to show off. See if he would flinch. Next time, punch him in the nose, and he'll back off," he advised. Ben blinked. He knew dragons had sensitive snouts, but he had never imagined himself ever being brave enough to punch something that had teeth as big as bananas. May's eyes went big. "Why would you do that?" she exclaimed. Simmons laughed. "Because he's an ornery snood, and he needs it. Dragons don't think like we do. Affection and respect for a dragon sometimes means a good rap on the nose," he chuckled. May frowned. "Seems to be a bit cruel," she muttered. "Sometimes love is pain, and sometimes coddling is cruelty. They aren't human. They aren't dogs. They aren't horses. They are dragons. And if you want their respect and stay in good one piece, the sooner you learn that, the better you'll be," he cautioned. "But what about the bastards that let the dragons loose?" Ben insisted. Simmons put up a finger and tapped his large hawk-like nose. "I have devised a plan," he declared. Ben and May grinned. "I'm putting you on night watch," Simmons announced. Ben groaned. "Then what?" May asked excitedly. Simmons arched a rueful brow. "You're getting a bit ambitious for your first day. For now, you will do nothing. With time, and if you work hard at the small tasks, I'll put more responsibility onto you. For now, this is Ben's assignment. Besides, only senior recruits are trusted with night patrol after curfew." May's excited grin faded away, and she lowered her gaze to the floor disappointedly as Master Simmons turned back to Ben. "Do not engage anyone. Just see what you can find and report back to me in the morning. Let me know if anything funny happens," Simmons instructed. Ben grinned. "So do I get the rest of the day off?" he asked. Simmons didn't smile back. His voice became stern and hard. "Don't see this as punishment, but a path to redeem yourself," he advised. When I find him, I'm gonna wring his neck," Ben growled. "Keep this between us, and I will see you are well compensated, perhaps even some leave time," Simmons assured him. Ben's eyes lit up, but just then he paused and glanced over to May. She was smiling back at him, and then he realized he didn't want to go. He didn't want to leave her, even if it meant shoveling pig slop or sharing a bowl of gruel. Simmons smirked. "I tell you what. If you find this troublemaker and bring him in, I'll take you both flying whenever this troublesome bulldrake clears off," he offered. Ben gave a sharp salute. "I won't let you down, Master Simmons," he promised. "Good to hear. If you two stick with it, I see a bright future for the both of you in Dragonhall," he encouraged them, and then his voice changed into a low, sinister whisper. "Now, this is where I start yelling, and you two run off and act like you've had a stern tongue-lashing." He winked before suddenly starting shouting at the top of his lungs. "If I catch you two kissing in this room again, I'll feed your maggot-ridden hides to the dragons!" he bellowed. Ben and May squawked in panic, and they grabbed their shoes and bolted out the door. They blushed as judgmental stares were cast toward them by their peers, until finally they found a quiet corner where they were alone again. "I've got to go mop the hallways and clean the latrines," May sighed. Ben gulped. "I gotta go to the burn pits and load up fresh ash," he lamented. "Are you going to let go of my hand?" May asked. He blinked. "Oh, May landed a kiss onto his lips and darted off. Ben felt his ears blaze red as he ambled awkwardly off in the opposite direction. "You lost, Ben?" Milo asked. "No, I'm just frustrated is all," he grumbled. Milo grinned a big grin. "Must be nice," he chuckled. "So was it worth the extra duty on night shift?" Ben let a flustered sigh as he put a shovel into a wheelbarrow. "Can you keep a secret, Milo?" he asked. Milo shook his head. "No, I prefer spreading gossip and rumors about like an old ninny." "Why?" he asked. "Forget it," Ben growled. He was already missing Jason. Milo was still fairly new and had a bad habit of being overly cheerful about everything. "Come on, Ben, you can tell me," he insisted. "No way, you'll tell everybody," Ben scoffed. "Oh, I would too," Milo agreed. Ben paused and smiled. "You know something? That's it. Can you spread a rumor for me?" he asked. "Who do you think I am?" Milo scoffed. "What do you got?" "I heard there's a new batch of hatchlings coming in," Ben announced. "That's it," Milo coughed as he shoveled more ashes into the wheelbarrow. "That means there will be tryouts for some new dragon masters," he explained. Milo grinned. "That should be interesting. How many do you think?" he asked. "Oh, probably 2 or 3, I imagine," Ben shrugged. "But don't tell anyone that I told you," he insisted sternly. Milo paused, tilted his head to the side, a little perplexed. Ben gave him a wink. Milo grinned. "I never heard nothin'," he chuckled. Up next, Chapter 8, The Watchtower. Chapter 8, The Watchtower. Master Torin. Master Torin's dark brown eyes did not hold light, only grim reality. He did not smile, he did not laugh, and he never slept. On this night, Master Torin sat in the cold tower on top of Dragon Mount and gazed out toward the ocean. The waves shimmered like black diamonds beneath the full moon. Torin did not look at the moon. He did not want to see its face. So many faces. So many faces. Too often he saw someone that was dead. But it wasn't them. They could never come back. And then the night was disturbed by the sound of the creaking ladder below. Torin reached for his crossbow. "You're awake," Torin grunted. Torin rarely talked, but he did so sparingly, and one of the ways to avoid conversations was to beat Simmons from stating the painfully obvious, and to put a cork into the endless questions. Simmons grimaced as he bonked his head on the low ceiling and closed the trap door below him and crouched until he was able to make himself comfortable on a wooden bench across from Torin and pulled out his spyglass. The silhouette of a black wing strafed across the moon like an obsidian blade. "I can't sleep with that drake flying around," Simmons grunted, and then frowned as he noticed the crossbow. "Cora said you have been carrying that around all over the place," Simmons remarked. Torin said nothing. He just sat there, a big black mountain of deafening silence. Simmons' focus quickly turned back toward the dragon. "It's massive, twice as big as Rex. I've never seen a bull drake so big," he marveled with dread and awe. "It's like it's just waiting for one of us to fly out," he scowled. "That's because it is," Torin grunted and passed over a flask to Simmons. Simmons knocked it back. Only a few drops of hard drink came out. "It's empty." "I know," he grunted agitatedly. Simmons smirked, took out his own flask, and poured a shot of hard drink and handed it back. "On the house," he chuckled. Torin quickly emptied it and gave a nod of appreciation, and then the deafening silence continued, disturbed by the distant, powerful, pulsing great wings beating off in the distance. Simmons let out a heavy sigh and turned south toward Founder's Keep. Founder's Keep housed the mages and their collective guilds whom guarded and protected their sacred library, while Dragon Hall was part of the same mountain fortress. Founder's Keep was kept separate. It was a steep, winding stone staircase down to the grassy basin where Dragon Hall had its own small slice of real estate walled off and guarded at all times. Founder's Keep didn't want any of their apprentice mages from sneaking out, and Dragon Hall didn't want them sneaking in. Simmons turned his focus to the east, to the great and wonderfully prosperous Glendon City. Glendon was the largest port city in the nation. It was the capital and the heart of all of Marne. "The last thing we need is for that dragon to go romping around downtown or try to make a nest on top of Founder's Keep. The Overseer wouldn't like that one bit." Simmons grinned when he heard Torin let out a soft, rumbling chuckle, but that was all he could coax from him. And so he went on, resuming the awkward, one-sided conversation. "It would be easier for us if it did. Savelle would smite the thing with lightning," he added. "She would smite us if it torched her school," Torn warned. Simmons' smile faded. The thought was a sobering one. He did not fear Lady Savelle, but the thought of failing to protect Founders twisted his guts up into knots. Being a mage himself, he had a soft spot toward Founders Keep. Simmons let out a heavy, grim sigh. He knew Torn was right. There was no telling what the feral drake would do once it got tired of trying to get into their colony and get after their hendrakes. Right now, it was waiting to swoop down and pounce on them the moment they went out to take off from the landing platform at the main cave entrance. The same thing happened to Nora. She had been unlucky to survive. Simmons wondered if he had been knocked off his own dragon, if he would have been able to swim with all this gear on. It probably wouldn't even matter. The fall was so far down, and the rocks, those jagged rocks waiting at the bottom, that's what would do him in. He remembered finding one of the female recruits, spotting her bloated, broken body bobbing up and down. Supposedly, one night she had left from the landing bridge. Many recruits simply quit. Many could not stand waiting for so many years. Some recruits quit sooner than others, but she had been so close and had been so promising. She reminded him of Nora. He never could have imagined that she would ever end her life. Simmons wished he had spent more time with her. Perhaps just a hint of encouragement might have been enough to keep her from losing hope. Maybe we can go down to Founders and grab a few good field mages that specialize in destructive elemental magic," he suggested. "Were you planning on tickling it with fire?" Torn grunted. "What should we do then?" Simmons asked. "Same thing as we always do. Send out a goat or a piglet onto the landing platform, lure it down, and shoot it from afar," Torn insisted. Simmons grimaced as he tried to take another look with his spyglass. He couldn't find it anymore, but he could hear it. He could hear the wings circling overhead like the sound of a sharp sigh slicing through wheat. "I know a few mages that are good with lightning," he offered. "A well-placed bolt from a ballista will work just as well. Besides, I've seen weather mages in action. They're just as likely to strike any one of us as they are what they're aiming for. Besides, I don't need Sybil over here telling us what to do and how to do it. This is our outpost. This is our job. We are supposed to deal with dragons and to patrol the coast. We aren't doing any of that while we are locked down. Besides, we have our own mages. That's why we recruit them, remember?" "That's got to be a record-long conversation." Simmons congratulated him, then immediately regretted it as Torn didn't respond. Thrash! Thrash! Went the wings, cutting the stillness like a knife. And this painful silence continued. "Thanks for the drink," Torn said at last. "Any time." Simmons paused as Torn held out his empty flask again. Simmons rolled his eyes, but just as he was about to humor his friend, the alarm bell rang out, loud and fast. The slow ring was a drill. This was not a drill. Torn lurched out of his chair. "Sons of Maltine! What could it be this time?" he cursed. Simmons felt his stomach churn. His thoughts immediately went to Ben, and he dreaded what he might find. Chapter 9. Ben sighed as he followed the line of fuzzy heads into the dining hall. After he had eaten, his body ached for his bed, and then he remembered that he was assigned to the nightly firewatch crew. It was a simple enough job, actually, one of the better ones. Ben would have gladly traded it for working in the burn pits, but pulling double shifts wasn't his idea of fun. What he wanted to do was what everyone did, find a small broom closet and sleep while a friend stood watch. But he had to keep focused and keep his mind sharp. "Your face is all blackened," Meg giggled. Ben arched his brow and glared at her through his bloodshot eyes. "And you smell like you've been swimming in bog water," he rasped. May's smile vanished, and then she flung her cup of water into his face. By the time Ben could clear his eyes, May had already stomped off. "Ouch, I think she likes you," Milo chuckled. "Shut up, Milo," he growled. Milo grinned. A cloud of dust went everywhere as he patted Ben on the back, causing an uproar around the table as wood ash came raining down on everyone's stew. "She's just jealous you made the list," he sighed. "What list?" Ben asked. "You know," Milo winked. "The short list." "We both saw it," he added. Ben grinned. "Oh yeah, but don't tell anybody," he insisted. Brumir turned around and tapped Ben on the shoulder. "What list?" he demanded. Ben sighed. "Did you tell him to? I haven't told nobody nothing about no hatchlings," Milo scowled. Brumir's eyes went big. "Oh, Sprigga, be praised," he exclaimed as he quickly moved over to Ben's table and leaned in close. "When are the hatchlings coming?" he asked. Ben shook his head. "Not the foggiest, but I saw the short list," he declared. "Who's on it? Did I make it? Did you see my name?" Brumir asked. "Ha! Please, Brumir, you've only been here a year," Milo scoffed. "Longer than you," Brumir huffed. "Did you make it, Ben?" Brumir asked. Ben gave a modest shrug and took a sip of his black tea. "Jason left me his bag of merit stones before he left, so yeah, I'm on it." Milo cursed. "Wait, what? That's what the merit stones were used for? I was spending them all on the commissary," he exclaimed. Brumir gasped. Me too. I didn't know. I thought you could save them up for leave after 2 years, but I didn't know you could move up on the listings. When did they do that?" he demanded. "Recently. It's a new policy they're putting in," Simmons told me. "I'm never going to be chosen," Brumir groaned. "Well, you might," Milo encouraged, clearly starting to feel a little guilty, but not guilty enough to end the prank. Brumir shook his head. "How? I haven't been saving." "Well, Ben could always pull a Molly," Milo laughed. "That's not funny," Ben snapped. "Yeah, what's wrong with you, Milo?" Brumir demanded. Sorry. I'm just saying it was sort of fishy, was all. But nobody listens to me. I'm not as smart as I look. I mean, yeah, whatever, you know what I mean." He shrugged and went back to eating his stew. Ben shook his head. "Milo, you're making people paranoid. Do you really think somebody pushed her in?" Milo shrugged. "Well, if you ask me, seems to be a lot of accidents happening lately," he grunted. "You mean more than normal?" Brumir laughed. "Well, do you remember when Master Warren went missing?" Milo asked. Ben shrugged. "Yes, his saddle came loose. But he is all right. And that could happen to anyone." Milo rolled his eyes. "And do you remember what happened to Tara?" Ben was silent. "I thought she jumped off the landing platform." Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. Did you hear about a suicide note?" he asked. Ben shook his head. Brumir's eyes went big and he leaned in with concern. "You could be in danger, Ben. You shouldn't tell anybody about the short list," he advised in a sincerely low, worried whisper. Ben pensively gripped his wooden spoon and glanced down at his stew. Suddenly, he didn't feel so hungry anymore. "Milo, why didn't you tell me about this before we started talking about the list?" he asked agitatedly. Milo gave him a perplexed look. I thought that's what you wanted. I mean, it's brave. I just wouldn't have the guts to stick out my neck like that." He laughed nervously. "Thanks, you're both our wonderful friends," Ben grunted. But somehow he felt better that Jason had left the hall. He could only imagine if someone went to the lengths of offing people, they weren't going to just up and leave. Not after doing all that. Bremir didn't have the temperament or the mindset to pull off something so diabolical even if he wanted to. And Milo? Ben wondered. No, Milo was a goofball, and he hadn't been around long enough to get that discouraged or to start offing fellow recruits. If anything, he was desperate to make friends. Milo was a lonely loudmouth who practically screamed for attention. What Ben was looking for was most likely a jaded senior recruit that was silently seething with hatred. Come to think of it, Ben glanced around. There were a lot of those. He might have suspected himself. More than he wanted to admit, Ben was always hesitant to make friends. He wasn't ever sure how long they would stick around. Then there were those who thought they could get ahead by making everyone around them look terrible. The snitches and backbiters. "Well, I guess I'm safe. I'm still new, and I squandered all my stones on candles and on parchment and ink," Brumir chuckled, and then looked worriedly over toward Ben. "I could stay up and keep watch with you if you're worried," he offered. Ben quickly shook his head. "I'll be all right." Part of him felt a little uneasy about Brumir's willingness to help look out for him. Brumir was from Barlington, a big, well-fed farm boy who had run off and wanted to see the world, and most of all, dragons. He never suspected Brumir of doing anything to hurt anybody, and therefore everybody suspected him of being up to something. Brumir was just too friendly and too helpful. Then again, Ben had grown up in Silvertine, a province with precious metals and gems, which attracted a whole lot of crime. Milo patted him on the shoulder. "Don't worry about it, Ben. You're huge. Plus, you're a mage. Whoever is doing this is a slimy weasel. They wouldn't ever try to take you on," he encouraged. Ben smiled. His abilities weren't exactly helpful in fighting. He couldn't call down lightning or control fire like some mages could, but he could heat up metal and was fairly good at alchemy. Gold was tricky. He could do it, but it would leave a unique elemental signature behind. Besides, just because you could do something didn't make it easy or right. As far as he was concerned, it wasn't worth the trouble or the attention. Ben hadn't ever told anyone about this. That was one of the reasons he had been sent to Founder's Keep, to be trained as a mage in the first place. It was either that or serving hard time breaking rocks. The sentence at the time seemed rather excessive for turning copper pennies into gold. Well, copper-plated, anyway. Ben couldn't ever turn the whole coin into gold, but the very thin outer surface, and the magic needed would cause the metal to heat up, and the finer the metal was, the closer he had to be to it, and it took more time, concentration, and energy. If he wanted to turn a whole copper or silver coin into pure gold, it would be a grueling 12-hour process. And if he didn't manage to cause a fire, die of heat stroke, or go blind from the light, he would be very sick and have horrible vertigo for days after. Not to mention, the reward for turning over lawbreakers to the authority was far more than he could ever make. "And whatever you do," Milo whispered conspiratorially, "don't fall asleep," he teased before wandering off to the barracks. Ben shook his head. Milo was always a clown. He tried to remember what he looked like before coming into the hall. A big mess of hair going every which way. The hair was gone now, but his goofy grin and wild green eyes remained. He always stuck out like an obnoxious red buoy in a sea of fuzz. No, Milo couldn't get away with anything, which was unfortunate, as he was always up to some sort of mischief or practical joke. But that idiot grin always gave him away. Ben couldn't help but find this oddly endearing, but only time would tell if Milo would stick around long enough to form any kind of meaningful friendship. It was easy to get discouraged. Everyone always left eventually. Once curfew came around, Ben wandered into the lounge where the lanterns were distributed amongst the blurry-eyed recruits. "You're with me, Ben. We'll patrol the East Wing," Roran declared. Ben yawned and gave a nod and followed along. "You look tired," Roran remarked. Ben nodded. "Yeah, I was in the burn pits all day," he croaked. "I can take first watch," Roran offered. Ben shook his head. "Nah, you go ahead. I got a lot on my mind," he replied. Roran shrugged. "Suit yourself. I wouldn't be able to sleep if I were you either," he remarked. "What do you mean by that?" Ben asked. Roran smirked. "If I was put on the short list, I wouldn't be able to sleep either. It must be nice being a mage, getting preferences over other folks who have been here forever." "I didn't know they did that," Ben remarked. He glanced over toward Roran, and then he felt a little bit better. Roran seemed fairly scrawny, and not that much of a threat. Bitter, yes. Potential creeper that might want to murder him while his back was turned? Perhaps. But Ben wasn't worried about him trying anything, at least not tonight. Well, it only makes sense. They keep changing the rules to pick out their favorites. When you've been around as long as some of us have been, you see it happen all the time, Roran grunted. "Don't get discouraged. Master Tarn and Morn aren't mages. You'll make it," Ben assured him. "Ha! Yeah. I'm sure Warren Fox made it. His father is the senator of Glendon Province," Roran scowled. "My father works in the mines in Silvertine. My family isn't wealthy at all," Ben reasoned. "And Torn wasn't in the infantry, and he's missing half his face," he added. Roran was silent for a moment. "Yeah, I suppose Master Torn is all right," he agreed, and then paused. "You're a bit big for a mage. You could have been a guardian," he chuckled. Ben gave a shrug. "It wasn't exactly a choice." "How do you mean?" "Oh, I get in a bit of trouble. So is either founders or hard labor breaking rocks," he laughed. "Well, you're not all that bad either, I guess," Roran chuckled. "I suppose you had to be pretty powerful, huh?" Ben shook his head. "No, I wish. I never could get the hang of the heavy elemental magic," he lamented. "Oh, no lightning bolts or fireballs, huh? Well, that's too bad," Roran chuckled as he pulled out a long loaf of bread and offered it up for him to pull off a piece. "I snuck a little something from the kitchens," he declared with a grin. "That's all right. I don't like eating while near the stables," Ben insisted. Roran smiled. "You're pretty smart for a tough guy," he laughed as he stuffed it back into his shirt and unbolted the heavy door. "Looks like everything's quiet." "Yep," Ben agreed. But just when he turned around, he found himself trapped by two heavy-set, rough, middle-aged recruits. "Who else is on the short list?" Jasper demanded. Jasper wasn't at all the sort Ben wanted to cross. Judging by the scars and tattoos on his arm, he had lived a very colorful life on the ocean before coming to the hall. K-Bar, on his left, sported a similar sleeve, and his face was scarred, and he had one ripped ear. But it was not their tattoos or their muscles that scared Ben. It was the heavy crossbow in Jasper's hand. Ben nervously moved away from the stairs. "What list?" he asked. Roran walloped him over the back of the head. Ben cursed as he was tumbling forward. Before he could recover, Jasper kicked him in the face. "Grab his feet, K-Bar," Jasper commanded. A ragged groan was all Ben could manage to protest as he was dragged into the middle of the stables. "Hey! Leave him alone!" Broomer bellowed from the top of the steps and came rounding the bend, brandishing a spear. Before Ben could call out, Jasper turned and loosed the bolt. Broomer fell back, gulping for air as blood flooded into his lungs. "Damn it! Throw him in as well!" Roran snapped. "Yeah! What?" K-Bar howled. "My belt! My pants! My belt!" he yammered as he began running about frantically as the hot metal turned bright red, burning away the leather belt and trousers until they fell away. Roran ran forward and gave a jump kick to Ben's ribs, causing him to lose focus on the casting the spell. Roran came again with another vicious kick, but Ben latched onto his leg and bit down onto the tendons, growling like a pit bull as he tore into flesh and muscle. Before Jasper or K-Bar could leap upon him with their drawn daggers, Ben had Roran onto the ground and thrashing about, obstructing their view in the cloud of ashes. Roran howled as his ankle was shattered, but before Ben could rise, K-Bar pounced on top of him. Ben saw the flash of steel and then heard a wailing, shrieking roar. Ben and K-Bar turned. Milo came barreling into the stables and rammed the heavy, leaf-shaped boar spear through K-Bar's torso. K-Bar's screams were cut off abruptly by the horrible snapping of jaws. In an instant, Rex separated K-Bar's head from his shoulders and disappeared into his stall. The dragon thrummed happily as he proceeded to crack open the skull like a nutcracker on winter's day. K-Bar's headless body continued to scream, continued to howl, until finally Ben ran out of breath and realized the shrieks were coming from himself. Finally, the alarm bells began to ring. Roran and Jasper bolted. Ben snarled as he came up from behind Roran and shoved him headfirst into the stone archway, knocking him out cold, and continued up the stairs. Jasper spun around and slashed at him with his dagger. Ben ignored the horrible laceration on his chest and tackled him to the ground, and they began the life and death struggle for the knife as they thrashed about on the stairs. "Filthy mage scum!" Jasper snarled as he clawed at Ben's eyes. Ben cursed as he was forced to turn his head to keep from being permanently maimed, and quickly captured Jasper's index finger, singling it out for destruction. He snapped it back, breaking it like a dried reed. The knife clattered to the ground, and Ben laid into him with all his strength and hatred, weeping and snarling with blood and snot running out of his nose as he rained fists down, beating Jasper's head into the stone step until he stopped moving, over and over again, until Milo's broken sobs of rage and anguish brought him back to his senses. Oh gods, Broomer, Broomer!" Milo wept. Ben looked up. Milo cradled Broomer in his arms. Broomer's bloody body lay twitching, the heels of his worn-out shoes weakly scraping at the stone steps as he fought for breath. Ben shakily crawled over toward them and put his hands onto his friend's shoulder. Milo turned and pulled Ben down. Help him! Milo pleaded. Ben's voice was hoarse from the smoke and strangled with anger, despair, and fatigue. "Stretcher! We need a stretcher! We need to get to Mender's Hall," Ben rasped. "But you're a mage! Milo insisted. Ben struggled to focus. There wasn't much he could do. Founder's Keep didn't exactly train mages how to channel after getting punched in the face. That sort of thing was typically reserved for the sword companions. Hold him still, Ben instructed. Milo quickly nodded, and Ben held his breath as he focused on the iron bodkin tip until the metal glowed hot. and he looked up at the ceiling. "Sprigga, help me," he prayed. The flesh crackled and smoked, sizzled like putrid bacon as he pulled the bolt out of Brumir's chest. Brumir's eyes fluttered open, and he let out a strangled gurgle as he fell in and out of consciousness. "Is he going to die?" Milo asked. "Not if we get him to Mender's Hall in time. Run ahead. Get help. Get a stretcher. I'll be right behind you," Ben panted as he draped Brumir over his shoulder and hurried back up the stairs. Chapter 10. Mender's Hall. Bong! Bong! Rang the alarm bell. Torn grabbed the recruit. "What's happening? What's going on?" he demanded. "People talk better when their feet are on the ground, Master Torn," Magicora exclaimed as she came running around the corner with her staff at the ready. "It's all right. Breathe. Tell us what your name is, and tell us what's going on," Simmons encouraged. "Gimbals! My name is Gimbals! Milo told me to bring the bell," he exclaimed. Right as he said this, Milo rounded the corner. His eyes were wild with terror and panic. Master Cora attempted to intercept him, but he pushed past her. But he was quickly snagged by Torn. "Speak!" he barked. "They attacked Ben! We tried to stop him, but they shot him! They shot him! Brumir's dying!" Milo wailed. Simmons cursed, and he took off and sprinted toward the stables. When he rounded the corner, he found Ben and hurried over to help ease Brumir down onto the stretcher. "Ben, what happened? Who did this?" Simmons demanded. Master Torn quickly took charge. "Out of the way! Move! Simmons, secure the stables! Cora, see to the dragons! Orin, security check!" he commanded. "Move!" he growled. Both the rider and bald-headed recruits got out of the way. Ben didn't have the strength or time to speak. He looked wildly about as Milo helped hoist Brumir up. Thankfully, Torrin stepped in. The big man's voice boomed throughout the halls, and every recruit within earshot plastered themselves to the wall as they ran through the mountain fortress until they came to the winding steps that led down toward the mountainside towards Founder's Keep. "Easy, easy," Torrin cautioned. Keep it steady. Let's not do more damage by dropping him." "It's all my fault, Milo sobbed. "I'll flog you for it later. Now shut up and keep moving," Torn barked. Ben panted raggedly as they moved their way down the steps and onto the grassy hillside. Normally the guards at the gate would have stopped them, but one look at Master Torn and the guards quickly opened the heavy doors and allowed them to pass without being bothered with formalities. It had not been the first time Dragonhall had to run their injured out to Mender's. Ben wished Mender's was closer to the north point of the 8-sided star fortress instead of on the far southern end. There had been a lot of heated debate over whether it should have been closer to the hall or the sparring yards, but after the incident with Nora Frey and the mender who had died trying to save her dragon, any thoughts of attempting to persuade them to trade wings was out of the question. Being a mage, Ben knew it was faster to go around than cut through the maze inside, even if it looked faster on paper. And so he led them around the western wing, through the garden path, which was created and maintained by the green mages who specialized in harmony magic. While it was the same distance on either side, he knew many instructors would be on the west wing. "Oh, gods help me! What happened?" Nims exclaimed as she hurried over to examine Brumir. Milo and Ben eased the stretcher and knelt on the grass, gasping for air. "He was shot by a crossbow. Ben took the bolt out," Milo explained. Nims muttered under her breath as she took her scissors and removed his shirt and began searching for the wound. You fools! You should have left it in," she exclaimed, and then paused and spotted the horrible burn where it had been cauterized. Nims let out a sigh of relief as she placed her hand over top of Brumir's chest. Brumir's eyes snapped open and he lurched upward and let out a guttural wailing howl. "Help me keep him down," Nims pleaded. Torn quickly knelt beside the injured recruit and forced him back down. Brumir stared up into Torn's horribly disfigured face and cold, black, beady eyes. "Milo, Ben, Mom!" "Let him breathe," Nim snapped. "Sorry," Torn apologized and quickly removed his large, gnarled hands from Brumir's mouth. Brumir's dark brown eyes darted about. He stared first at Master Torn, and then relaxed when he looked toward the tranquilly calm Magi Nims. Even though her black hair was peppered in silver strands, she was very well put together for a woman of her age. "You're safe. You'll need a lot of bed rest. No burn pits, and don't pick up anything heavy for a few weeks," she announced, her sharp blue eyes directing the statement toward Master Torn. "Thank you, Magi Nims." "Oof!" Brumir groaned as Torn pushed him back down. "That's an order, not a suggestion," he snapped. Nim smiled. "Thank you, Master Torn. These foolhardy recruits will be far more careful if I had you around. Do come and visit more often," she insisted with a warm smile as he helped her struggle up to her feet. "Do you like scones?" she asked. "No." Nim stuck up her nose and took up her blue dress. "Then you can't have any," she sniffed. "Come on, bring the walking wounded," she instructed. Torn glanced down toward the three recruits. Brumir gulped. Milo grinned and looked toward Ben. "She means you, shovelhead," he chuckled. Ben blinked. "But I'm fine," he insisted. Torn chuckled. "How many fingers am I holding up?" he asked. Ben's eyes went big when he saw Torn's disfigured right hand. 8.5, he ventured. Torn's large fingers and nubs crackled as they balled up into a menacing fist. "How many now?" Ben's crooked grin fell away, and he quickly pivoted around and began marching toward Mender's Hall. "Sit over there, and take off your shirt, and try not to bleed all over the place," Nims instructed. "I'm not bleeding," Ben chuckled. "I suppose you don't have a concussion either," Nims remarked. "But I'm fine," he insisted. But the moment he took off his shirt, he saw the horrible bloody gash that snaked across his neck and down his collarbone. Milo grinned as he stuffed another jelly-filled scone into his mouth. "You know, you should work on getting better at dodging things like knives and fists and shovels," he advised. "Sons of Maltine, what happened?" Torn demanded. "Magi Simmons wanted me to find out who the bastards were that were messing with the locks in the stables. So I was put on the night shift, and then I got jumped. I would have been dragon food if it wasn't for Milo and Brumir," Ben explained. Milo and Brumir nodded. "Simmons put you three up to this?" Torn demanded. Milo and Brumir pointed toward Ben. Ben gulped. Does this mean we don't get to go flying?" he asked worriedly. Right then, Simmons came running in. Torn let out an agitated grunt, his dark, beady brown eyes locked onto his friend. "How's everybody?" Simmons asked. Nims glanced over from the counter of herbs and spices and gave him a cold, accusatory stink eye as she nodded toward Ben's massive laceration and star-crossed, battered face. "Gods, that's nasty," Simmons gasped, and then turned and smiled at Brumir. "Glad to see you're doing better," he encouraged, and turned toward Torn. "All is well at Dragon Hall. Rex had a bit of a snack. There is blood all over the place. But from what I can gather from the dragons, you boys are some tough sons of Maltine. Glad to have you with us," he declared. "Did you need a broken leg?" Torn asked with a grim sarcasm, but his voice held no laughter. Simmons blinked. He sensed the tension, the smoldering rage fuming from his friend. "Would you like to talk outside?" he ventured. Without a word, Torn stomped outside and spun around, pointing a nubby finger into Simmons' chest. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. "I wasn't expecting this. I was only trying to find out information. You have no idea what those bastards were up to. All just to get up the stupid list. They killed Molly. Did you know that?" Who knows, they may have even tampered with Warren's saddle. Other good recruits have gotten injured, run off, or disappeared, he insisted. Idiot! If you had told us, one of us could have been there. Why did you send them alone? Torn demanded. We have other things to worry about, like that bloody bulldrake flying about. Do you remember what happened to Nora? He demanded. Torn grunted and pulled at his flask. It was empty. He cursed and launched it into the nearby pond. Simmons handed over his own flask. Torn snatched it and quickly guzzled it down, and then chucked it into the pond as well. Feel better? Simmons asked. Torn braced his hands on his hips and took a deep breath, and then let it go. Yeah. Tomorrow morning, I will lure it out, Simmons declared. Oh, no, you don't. I'm not letting you dissolve your guilty conscience that easy, Torn growled. What do we do then? Simmons asked. We'll keep it simple and send a goat out and shoot it from the archway above, he insisted. Simmons grimaced. It's a big drag, Torn. It's got to be at least 100 years old. And all the more reason not to be sending anybody out. We can lose a goat, not another dragon rider, Torn advised. Yeah. But I still think we need some kind of second plan. A second plan can't hurt, Torn agreed. Just in case if things went wrong, we could try to convince Adar to help us finish it off. He's a weather mage, and then we won't have to go to Founders. It will be settled in the house, he added quickly. Weather mages have to be outside under open skies, Torn growled irritatedly. Well, I wouldn't let him go out alone. I'll lead a group of senior recruits with shields and spears, and... Really? Spears? Iron-tipped poles and lightning. Do you know how I got my burns? Simmons, have I ever told you the story how I got all my scars? Simmons frowned. Lightning? A weather mage in a bloody spear formation, Torn snapped at him. Simmons ran his hands through his hair and looked down at the ground. Damn it. I didn't. No, you didn't, did you? You didn't think. None of you mages ever think. You always run in with a wand in one hand and your other hand up your back pocket looking for glitter and not a clue what's going on around them. You just hide behind everybody and call down lightning, he growled. I get it. But I haven't heard any plan B from you yet, because I don't think that big, ugly, feral bulldrake is going to be happy after you shoot him, Simmons growled back at him. Torn braced his hands on his hips and shambled about and kicked a rock out of his path. His dark brown eyes glanced about, clearly frustrated. We'll finish it off with crossbows. If you can't take it out with a bolt from a ballista, a bunch of little pointy sticks is only going to take it off. And when it gets inside, and it will, what do we do then? How do we stop it from getting into the stables? Simmons demanded. Torn's nostrils flared as he paced about. Well, fine. If it wants in, we'll let it in. So we'll let it in? Are you nuts? Simmons exploded. Torn let out a mad cackle and grinned, a big, white, toothy, menacing grin. We'll build a trap, Simmons, he declared. We are not letting that inside. It would wipe out the whole colony, he protested. Not if we block it off. We'll carve out the floor. It will fall in, and we'll be able to finish it off with spears nice and quick, Torn explained. Torn, it's solid granite. That'll take months at best. We can't wait that long, Simmons ranted, and then his eyes lit up. Unless we have a mage that could alter the rock into something soft, like sandstone, Torn grinned. Now this is a plan I like, he agreed, and gave his friend a hearty slap on the shoulders. Son of Maltine, this is going to be a long night, and even a longer day. Simmons chuckled. I suppose we better check on our alchemist. Torrin tilted his head. Is that what it's called? I thought alchemy was turning metals into gold. Simmons grinned as he leaned forward and picked up a stone and tossed it into the air. Ha ha! I imagine it's closely related. Turning one rock into another should be simple enough. Chapter 11. Some Kind of Plan. After hearing the muffled shouts coming from outside, the 3 young recruits looked up in surprise as the 2 senior Dragon Masters came strolling back in with big grins on their faces as they glanced over toward their secret weapon. Ben swallowed hard. Am I in trouble? He asked worriedly. No, not at all, Simmons chuckled. Ben glanced nervously toward Torrin. Torrin never smiled, but right now his face was lit up like a jack-o'-lantern. You're good at alchemy, right? Ben hesitated. I think so. Torrin's smile faded, and he became very stern as he leered down at him. Yes or no? Yes, Ben said quickly, not sure what Torrin was talking about, but he didn't want to disappoint him. Simmons grinned. Do you think you could change a slab of granite into sandstone for us? Ben grimaced. Sandstone is really complex. I could turn a granite slab into something else. Preferably something more uniform and still mineral-based, he offered. Torrin cursed and picked up an empty chair. Master Torrin, you put that down this instant, Nim scolded him. The wooden backing creaked and whined underneath the tension, until finally Torrin quelled his rage and neatly set it back down on the floor and stalked off outside and let out a blood-curdling roar and commenced ripping up a sapling from its roots and began threshing it against the earth. What did you want to change a slab of granite for? Ben asked. Simmons offered a nervous, polite smile towards Magi Nims and then glanced over toward Ben. Well, we needed the granite floor into something soft enough so that we could do a little remodeling is all, he explained. How about limestone? Ben suggested. Simmons shook his head. That would still take too long. Not if you use vinegar to dissolve through it. With vinegar, you'll cut through the stone like cheese. But I don't think I can do the whole floor. Only small portions at the time. That'll do just grand. All we need is a few holes for some pikes and crossbows under the floor, he guffawed. What for? Ben asked. Simmons glanced over to Torrin, who was now peeling the bark off the sapling with his teeth. We are planning to trap the bull drake inside the lobby, he explained. The one that attacked Master Frey and killed her dragon, he asked. Simmons took in a long, deep, cleansing breath and nodded. The same, he said at last. I will make some holes in the ceiling up top and on the sides as well, Ben declared. Nims frowned. You are not to be doing this tonight, are you? She demanded. We'll do what needs doing, same as you, Simmons insisted. Ben quickly rose to his feet. Magic Nims had helped him recover from the concussion, but he still sported a large red mark from the knife across his chest. It was not bleeding anymore, but it still promised to give him some irritation. But it has been healed enough where the scarring would be barely noticeable. Broomier grinned as he sat up. What are we waiting for then? He asked. But before he could get out, his eyes rolled back and he fell into his bed. Magi Nims returned her wand into her sleeve and gave him a rueful shake of her head. Magi Simmons, where do you find these shovelheads? You're worse than the fools beating their brains out in the sparring grounds, she muttered. Her sharp eyes darted toward Ben, but he quickly hopped behind Simmons before she could knock him out as well. They're a good lot, Simmons chuckled. Milo grinned as he hurriedly slid the rest of the scones into his shirt. "Thank you again, Nims," he called back to her. "Torin!" Simmons called. "What?" he demanded. "You feel better yet?" he asked. Torin paused. "I think so," he grunted. Simmons grinned and gave Ben a wink. "So I was telling Ben about my idea of luring the dragon into the lobby." That was my plan. You wanted to get a weather mage and blast us all to bits," Torin growled. "Well, Ben and I made it better," he teased. "You see, we'll turn the granite into limestone and dissolve it away with vinegar." "It's still my plan," Torin grumbled. Unfortunately, when they got to Founder's Keep, as much as Simmons and Torin were excited to share their plan with the rest of the Dragon Masters, it quickly became apparent that the 6 were not all on board, and no matter how excited Simmons tried to appear, or how much Torin shouted, there was clearly a large divide. Cora, their elemental mage, who had been close friends to Nora Frey, was in full agreement. Adar, Irene, and Warren, on the other hand, staunchly disagreed. The mood was tense at the round table after Don Rascal had died, so had the sense of unity amongst the 8, and with Nora Frey exiled to Helvisti, their divisions only increased. "If we're going to do all this effort to trap the dragon, why shouldn't we try to tame it instead?" Irene demanded. "Were you going to sing it a song?" Torin scowled. Irene's face flashed red with anger, but Solsman was quick to stick up for her. "Master Torin, your uncivilized rhetoric will not be tolerated. We are equals here." "I feel we should at least try to save it. We are dragon riders after all. I did not join to become dragon slayers," Warren agreed. Torin grunted as he sat back and propped his boots onto the table and pulled out a pipe. But when he could not find his lighter, he began gnawing at the stem, crunching it in the back of his teeth until it finally broke, and commenced to chewing like a very hangry beaver. Simmons sighed. "It seems it's 3 against 3, and whatever we decide, we must decide quickly. If Nora were here, she would have wanted to kill that bulldrake," Cora scowled angrily. "If we counted her vote, things would be settled." Irene was not swayed. "If we are counting people that aren't a part of this table, Don Rascal would have wanted us to try everything to save it first, not kill it dead on arrival," she shot back. "Don Rascal is dead, perhaps even killed by the same dragon that attacked Magi Frey," Cora insisted. "There were no markings. He could have merely had a heart condition and falling off," Warren shrugged. "Yes, and I suppose his dragon just flew off without him," Simmons agreed sarcastically. "Killing the dragon won't help anything. If we bring it in, if you give me a chance to tame it, we could be up a dragon, not down too," Irene insisted. "If we gave you a chance, we could be even more short-handed than we already are," Cora snapped angrily. Wait. I'm not saying we shouldn't be ready to put the dragon down. We should most definitely be prepared to do so, and plan to. I just think it shouldn't be the first thing we do," he insisted. "At least give her a chance," Adar agreed. Irene nodded. "That is the only thing I want. I just want a chance. That is all." Simmons glanced over toward Torin. "What say you? You're the senior of the group." Torin shrugged and spat out the broken pipe into his hand and stuffed them into his pocket. "Let her try," he grunted. Irene beamed happily as she ran over and placed a quick kiss onto his forehead before the grouchy old vet could wave her away. "Torin, she'll get herself killed," Cora snapped at him angrily. Then we won't have to worry about having any more ties, will we? He scowled. Cora's eyes widened with indignation. Relax. Torn is just joking, Simmons insisted. Well, nobody is laughing, Cora snapped. If things go wrong, we'll be ready, Torn growled irritatedly. If something goes wrong, she and many others could be dead, Cora warned. I only request an hour to lure it down and see if the bull drake can be coaxed into the holding area. If I can do that, please promise me you will not kill him, Irene insisted. Fine, but you'll be on your own. Don't drag anybody else into this, Torn agreed. Unbelievable, Cora cursed angrily. After all this, after losing Golden Eyes and Nora, you want to bring this beast and sing it lullabies. I would like to try, Irene insisted. Simmons grimaced. All right, you can try, he agreed. But we have to be ready if things go wrong. You know that, right? He insisted. Irene nodded. Of course. I'm not a child, Master Simmons. But dragons are not monsters either. I believe I have proven myself as a dragon soother. I believe I deserve a chance to try, she insisted. Adar smiled. If such a thing can be done, it would be you who could do it, he agreed. Torn grunted. All right. Well, Irene tunes her harp. The rest of us have lots of work to do, he growled. Chapter 12. No Rest in Dragon Hall. There was no rest to be had in Dragon Hall. Every recruit was called out to barricade the stables with rocks and sand. Meanwhile, a crew with bottles of vinegar, picks, and shovels followed Ben around as he focused on metamorphosizing the hard granite into small limestone channels to be chiseled away into a grid of murder holes inside the entry, ceiling, and floor, so that they could shoot crossbows and thrust spears into the feral dragon when it was trapped inside. Ben! Did you hear about the dragon? May exclaimed. Ben gave a tired nod before turning up a clay water pitcher to empty half into his mouth and spilling the rest down his shirt. He was so tired, but there was so much more to do. Yeah, we are going to lure it inside, he grunted. May stepped away. But Ben! They're going to kill it! Ben shook his head and gave her a tired smile. Not if Master Reen can help it. She is the best dragon soother in all of Glendon, probably all of Marne, he assured her. But Master Torn and Simmons are right. We have to prepare for the worst. May smiled and gave Ben a hug. I heard about what you did, she whispered. Please tell me that you didn't hear about that from a dragon, he groaned. May ruffled Ben's fuzzy head. Everybody's talking about it, she giggled. If it wasn't for Brumir and Milo, I would have been dragon scat. I should have been more careful. Brumir could have died, he sighed. But May only laughed. Careful! I never thought I would hear that from a dragon rider's mouth, she teased. Ben frowned. It was like May hadn't been listening to a word he had been saying. You haven't been around here that long, and I'm not a dragon rider, he grunted. May grinned. Dragons are terribly dangerous, she teased. Ben felt his stomach turn as he remembered one of the senior recruits' heads being torn off. At the time, it had only been focused on saving Brumir, but the image in his head made him pale as he tried to keep his empty stomach from purging out the water he had just drank. Ben, are you all right? Meg asked. He nodded. Yeah, I'm just tired. You should take a break, May insisted. Ben shook his head. No, I can't. I have to finish. Everyone is depending on me. We have to get those arrow and spear holes carved out. May frowned. She had seen overzealous apprentice mages die from overcasting before. It was always the natural-born mages, too. The wizards that had tapped into their abilities early didn't know any better. There was no real hard number for overcasting. For every mage it was different. It was sort of like running. Some people were just born to run. But eventually, no matter who it was, fatigue would settle in. Only in this case, overcasting went from simple fatigue to dropping dead. Mages could go from laughing and carrying on one moment, and the next second be a lifeless, pale corpse. It didn't matter how big or how small, or if they were male or female. When a mage overcast, there was no remedy. There was no cure. When it happened, they just dropped dead. But Ben, don't you remember what happened to Maya? She was the mender who tried to save Nora's dragon, but they both ended up dying. You won't be any use to anybody if you overcast, she pleaded with him. But Ben was stubborn, and he would not be swayed. May continued. She tried to reason with him. But you said Master Rivers was going to save the dragon. We are going to save the dragon. We don't need all of this. This isn't necessary, May insisted. Ben shrugged. Simmons said she was going to try, and she has only been given one chance. Master Torn, Cor, and Simmons are pretty keen on making sure the Drake is put down. Do you think I could go with her, May asked. Master Irene? I don't think she likes to talk to people much, and definitely not to us recruits, Ben grunted tiredly. There was then a woman with long jet-black hair and piercing green eyes came around the corner, cradling a harp in her arms. Everyone held their breath as Irene glanced over toward them. Before Ben could stop her, May ran out and blockaded her path. May I come with you? She pleaded. May gulped. I meant, may I please come with you, Master Irene, she corrected herself. Irene wanted to be angry, but then she wondered, if things went horribly wrong, what would the young girl think of her? What would be the final words in the young girl's mind be? I was just like you. Patience, everything in due time, she assured her. The young female recruit was not swayed. Please, I don't want to kill the dragon either. Please let me help with something besides killing dragons, May begged. Irene gave the young girl a calm, serene smile. No one wants to kill dragons, she assured her. I'm a graduated mage. I could help talk and soothe the dragon, she insisted. Irene shook her head. It is too dangerous. The others would not approve. Please, just let me have a chance. I gave up everything to be here, she begged. As did we all. I took this burden upon myself. Therefore, I will go alone, and I will do my best, she insisted, and stroked the young recruit's flushed cheek and gazed into her eyes. They were now full of tears. Be brave. No matter what happens, we all must do our part, she whispered, and then turned away and walked out the small door that led to the large landing bridge that stuck out of the cliffside over the waves crashing against the rocks below. May fought back frustrated, angry tears. When she turned around, Ben opened his arms and attempted to console her, but she darted away. Ben was about to call after her when Simmons came. How are things going? How much do we have left? Simmons inquired. Taken by surprise, Ben glanced about and quickly regained his focus. So what's taking so damned long, recruit? Torrin growled, but Simmons gave his friend a hard glare. Magic is not easy. I'm impressed that he has accomplished as much as he has. Considering everything, Simmons scolded him. A fierce, unsettling chuckle rumbled from Torrin's chest. Fine, because I was going to give him the day off as soon as he was done, was all. I want to stay, Ben insisted. Simmons arched his brow and frowned. You're running a fever. You should be getting bed rest soon, he warned. I want to see this through, Ben insisted stubbornly. Torrin grinned and presented Ben with a spear. You're pretty damn tough for a mage. Try not to die, he encouraged him. Ben grinned. Torrin wasn't the sort for compliments, and he knew it was likely the only one he was ever going to get. Once the last channel was carved out, he met up with Milo, who was drowsily standing by the narrow window with his crossbow, gazing out toward the bright ribbon of light slithering across the horizon. You don't look so good, Ben, Milo chuckled. Ben smiled. Yeah, well, you look like Dragonscat, he teased. I feel like it too. I still can't believe this is happening all in the same night, Milo groaned. Have you heard anything about Brumir? Ben asked. He is supposed to be at Mender's Hall, Milo remarked, landing an accusatory glare toward his friend, quietly resting on a wooden crate. Ben turned. Brumir! We had to carry you all the way down to Founder's Keep. What are you doing up here? He demanded. Brumir offered a sheepish grin. I wasn't tired. Besides, I had to bring you guys some jelly scones, he declared. Ben smiled. Where are they? Well, it was a long walk, Brumir confessed. Ben laughed. Glad you're doing well. Me too, Brumir agreed. Besides, I can't miss this, he insisted. I love it when Master Irene plays her harp, he grinned. That's because you have a crush on her, Milo teased. Brumir gave a dismissive shrug. Who doesn't? He laughed. Milo grinned. I don't. She always complains about everything, and I think she has a funny nose, he declared. Brumir's face darkened, and his jaw set like granite. She does not! Milo was about to make another snide comment, but the heavy metal pickaxe in Brumir's hand quickly sobered him. Son of Maltine, Brumir! I was only playing, he exclaimed. Brumir smiled. I'm getting a better view. You two coming or not? He called back. Milo grinned, and Ben's eyes lit up as they hurriedly followed after him through the winding staircase until they were on top of the lookout tower that looked over the landing bridge down below. Master Simmons and Torrin all turned and frowned as the young recruits awkwardly shuffled in. Recruits aren't allowed up here, Torrin growled agitatedly. Simmons. It's only Ben, Milo, and... Brumir! Torrin growled. I won't tell anyone, Brumir promised. You'd better not, Torrin agreed, before grouchily turning away and went back to scanning the horizon with his looking glass. Simmons sighed. I suppose since Irene is breaking the rules, we can too, he remarked, and gave Brumir an inquisitive glance. Aren't you supposed to be in Mender's Hall? He demanded. I feel fine, Brumir assured him. So, about that reward for saving everybody, Milo ventured. You get the best seats in the house, Simmons announced. Milo grinned. Any snacks? He asked. Simmons grinned as he passed a bowl of salted peanuts. Of course. Help yourself. Without thinking, Ben quickly intercepted the bowl, and only after cramming his third heaping handful into his mouth did he realize how hungry he was. You really should be sleeping, Ben, Simmons remarked as he passed the young mage a wineskin. Milo nodded as he picked through the meager remains of the peanuts and turned to offer the rest of the crumbs to his friend, but Brumir was too busy leaning on the stone merlons, smiling dreamily as he stared down at Master Irene. What happens if things go wrong? Brumir asked worriedly. Torn grunted as he examined the large barbed javelin tip before sliding it into the place of the giant crossbow ballista. "Depends how wrong they go," he remarked. Simmons nodded. "If the dragon gets too aggressive, then Irene will retreat back inside and take cover with the rest of the recruits," he explained. "What do we do?" Milo asked excitedly. "Pretend like you're invisible and don't get in front of the big crossbow," Torrin instructed. "And run like hell if we do," Simmons added. "Can it get into here?" Milo gasped in surprise. Simmons grimaced. "If Torrin hits his target, I'm very certain it will try." Ben glanced over toward the powerful crossbow limbs set at full tension. "I don't miss," Torrin muttered.